Okay, fantastic. And then Leah, I'm just going to rely on you to tell me when, who's going to be in the best position to tell me when somebody is there and needs to speak. That's you probably, right, Leah?
I'm sorry. Say that again.
No, I just want to make sure that I can see when people are ready to speak, that we've asked to mute their video. So how is going to be the best way for them? Do they communicate that to you? Hi, I'm ready to speak. And then you tell me.
If they'll just raise their hand, then you can see that.
Oh yeah, that's true. Okay. So if everybody, so Christina, are you asking to speak?
No, did I?
Okay. So on the,
I just take that off.
We're all learning Zoom together.
Okay,
So
there you go.
if you click on participants, if everyone will click on participants at the bottom part of their screen, it should pop up a window on the right-hand side that lists everybody who's here. At the bottom of that list, you'll see a thing that says raise hand. If everybody, let's test it out right now. So if you see that raise hand, click it, everybody, so I know that you know it's there. Great. Waiting for Brock Loomis. Let's see, Jim got it. So I still have 3 people here. Maybe they're not paying attention at this point. Okay, everybody click them off. Looks like I think mostly got it.
Okay, we're live, ready to go.
Okay, so we're official?
Yep.
Welcome everyone to our August 8th Planning Commission meeting, which we're doing via Zoom. It feels like it was a lifetime ago that we were last together. I was chatting with one of our commissioners. I feel like that was the last normal day that we had. And then we've had an extraordinary set of events. So I hope that everyone is staying healthy, staying safe. And I really appreciate that we have the technology that allows us to do this. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll start with a Pledge of Allegiance. And Leah will be putting up on the screen a flag. There we go. All right. And if you can just begin with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States
of
America
and to the
republic
for which it stands,
one nation under God, indivisible,
with liberty and
justice for all.
Okay. And thank you. I have asked Commissioner Kjar to give us a thought or prayer tonight, so I will turn the time over to him.
I wanted to do a little bit of both. Many of you are familiar with Ann Landers. If you're not, she's a columnist that gave advice to people who would write in, and she was giving advice to somebody who had written in expressing some dismay about all the troubles that they had been encountering. And I think Ann Landers' advice at that moment was on point and also helpful, and we can glean some lessons to be learned as we're encountering some rather novel times. So I quote, in response to this, in response in her column, she said, "Expect trouble as an inevitable part of life, and when it comes, hold your head high. Look it squarely in the eye and say, I will be bigger than you. You cannot defeat me. Then repeat to yourself the most comforting of all words, this too shall pass." And I think that that's good advice to follow at any time, but especially when you're meeting probably rather anxious moments as we've seen in the last month. So it's important to hold our heads high and remember that this is temporary. This too shall pass. And then I'll just do a quick prayer and we'll go from there. Our dear Father in heaven, we're thankful for the time to come together to meet, to go through the public's business. We appreciate the blessings that we have and for the opportunity we have to assist in moving the land use forward and to assist the public in protecting their interests. We ask thee for thy help as we move forward with this, and we say this in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to start with the first item on our agenda. We have an administrative decision. This is the request for a parking modification for pint-sized Picassos at 181 South Main, Suite A. So I will turn the time over to staff.
Thank you, Chair Heyman and members of the commission. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Oh, let's see. Okay. So this first item is, there isn't a public hearing for this. I just was going to do some highlights of this particular application. The applicant, Jim Delahunty, has requested a parking modification so that he can receive a business license for his art education studio, Pint-Sized Picassos. Staff has reviewed the application and there are a few things to focus on. First of all, it's a 2-suite property and Cut Bop is Suite B. And Cut Bop had to receive a conditional use permit, which required a parking study. And so that CUP requires Cut Bop to have 5 parking stalls, 5 of the 11 current parking stalls, in addition to parking their vans and trucks and additional vehicles to the north and south of the building, not in parking stalls. So the applicant's proposed parking plan violates Cut Bop's CUP and parking study. So that's the main issue here. But in addition to that, the applicant's proposal doesn't provide dimensions, drive aisles, stalls, driveways as required by the Centerville zoning code 12.52. However, the applicant has requested that we follow suit with our neighboring cities and do a parking stall per square foot allowance, which if we followed suit with our neighbors, that would be 5 stalls per 1,000 square feet. And then that would take up the rest of the parking stalls and then allow them to get their business license. Staff recommends that we require a parking study to determine if 5 stalls is sufficient for them. The requirement in the code is 0.5 stalls per person under maximum occupancy, which would be plus a stall per employee, which would be 15 stalls, which 15 stalls might not even be able to fit on the whole lot. So that's why they're requesting this parking modification, but staff recommends that we table this item and require a parking study and then review that parking study to determine if we can lessen the parking stalls.
Thanks, Mackenzie. I have a couple of questions, but before I start, does anyone have any questions for staff?
I do. Spencer.
Go ahead, Spencer.
So how many square feet is the suite in question?
Oh, I am not muted. Okay. The suite in question is 1,098 square feet. The whole building is just over 2,000 square feet, and the 2 suites share a common entrance. But Suite A is just 10,000 or 1,098.
Okay.
And I have a question. This is Commissioner Kerr for staff. I know that in some instances there can be shared parking arrangements with nearby property. Was that explored with the property to the north by chance, or is that not feasible given the barrier between the 2 properties?
It hasn't been explored that I know of. It wasn't provided in the application.
Okay, just curious. And you'd have to have a compliant, a willing neighbor.
That's right.
But the one to the north has what, 6 stalls that could be parked? And if I'm not understanding things correctly, tell me otherwise, but the property to the north is not often used at the peak hours that this property would for its business.
Commissioner Kerr, you bring up a good point. The applicant does have a right to look at off-site parking, as you would label it. They can petition for that. It has to be approved by the Planning Commission. And there are certain parameters to make sure it's in place. And if it's taken away for any reason, then it would rescind that approval. The parameter is within 500 feet of the premises. So that's something that could be explored if the applicant wanted to.
Mackenzie, in connection with your discussions with the applicant, so in your staff report, you had indicated that the applicant said that there are only going to be 2 employees who are going to be working from their homes at the site. But I did notice in the applicant's response in some of the materials that they had submitted is that they were looking at some of the north end stalls and said if Cut-Bop were to leave, that they would gladly take the spaces on the north side of the building for employees, which seems inconsistent to me. So do they plan on having employees park there or not?
That it was an inconsistency within the application, so the applicant will have to address that.
Okay, I'll leave that question there for the applicant. There was also a reference in the applicant's submissions that they had looked for a copy of the parking study that Cut-Bop that was referenced in the Cut-Bop application and was not able to find it. Do we know why that wasn't in the record?
So as far as I understand, what happened is they submitted a grammar request and it wasn't found in the initial search and documents for that grammar request. However, when I started working on this application, I found that, and then through Leah, the city recorder, passed that on to the applicant as, you know, an addendum to their grammar request so that they do have access to that now, but they didn't when they originally submitted.
Got it. I appreciate the clarification. I was just wondering. Any other questions for staff?
It looks like Spencer has a question.
Yeah,
Yes,
and
Spencer.
mine's maybe not a question. Maybe I'm just jumping in. I was just going to make a few comments. Do you want me to hold off on comments?
Yeah, let's hold off on comments until
Okay.
we give the applicant the opportunity to address.
Perfect.
So if there are no more questions for staff, I'll pause for a second. Seeing no questions. Okay, we'll go ahead and invite the applicant. So if Jim Delahanty, I know I saw you on there before. Jim, if you want to now, there you go. Pop yourself up, take yourself off mute. Perfect. Okay. Welcome. If you'll just introduce yourself for the record.
My name's Jim Delahanty, Centerville resident and applicant for the parking modification.
And do you want to speak to the staff recommendation?
I do, actually. I read the staff recommendation and I understand their request for parking study. I understand that request. But I'd like you to consider something in making your decision. I've been in civil engineering and land planning for 25 years. I have designed multiple projects, both at McNeil Engineering and ASWN. All of them have been built, many of them in Centerville. And when you master plan retail buildings that don't have end users, the common rule is you look at about 5 stalls per 1,000 gross square feet. So every strip mall out there that doesn't have an end user, this is what it's been planned for. And so when you write a code such as this code that exceeds those retail things, you've created a hardship on this property and every other retail property in Centerville because it exceeds common planning practices. We'll never have an art studio because it's not the way it gets built. Unless you build an art studio from scratch designed to meet this code, you'll never have it because you can't meet it. Because when you're only talking about 1,000 square feet, you're just not going to get 20 parking stalls or 15 parking stalls on any site within the city. That code exceeds common land planning practices. and does create a hardship. That is why I have shown what I have shown and why I did the research for all of our neighboring cities in Davis County, showing what their requirements are so that they can have these particular facilities within their city. I'm trying to bring it to Centerville. I don't want to take my kids to Bountiful or Kaysville or anywhere else to cheer classes or dance classes or whatever else it is. I want to bring it to my city. That's why I'm asking for this. Those are common engineering practices that this code unintentionally makes impossible for an art studio. So my official request is, can we stick with common land planning practices at 5 stalls per 1,000 square feet, which is concurrent with all of our adjoining neighbors? And can I bring an art studio for youth, children, and families to Main Street in Centerville? I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for the applicant?
I do.
Yes, Becky.
Have you been able to reach out to any adjoining neighbors beyond Cut Bop to see about shared parking, like was mentioned, the neighbor to the north?
We have not explored that option, no.
Okay.
Question from Commissioner Kerr. In your conversations with Cut Bop, how do they feel about this? Are they willing to, I don't know, call it shuffle things around in the parking lot to try to make your proposed use work? What have they said?
Honestly, what they said, they're leaving that location at the end of this month.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
My communications go through the property owner. He called me about 2 weeks ago and asked me if I wanted to take both sides and said that Cut Bop is leaving. It will not be renewing their lease. I believe he did say at the end of this month. It might be the end of next month. I don't want to mislead you. I told him that I'm sorry at this time, I can't take both sides. I'm only looking for one side of your building. And that's as much information as I know. I've left that with the property owner.
Any other questions for the applicant? If not, thank you very much. We appreciate your comments, Mr. Delahunty.
Thank you.
Any further questions for staff?
This is Commissioner Kerr. Do we have any representation from the owner of the property here today, or anybody from Cut Bop?
Not that I'm aware of.
Chair Heyman, if I can weigh in for a second.
Yes, please do.
I've heard the same thing with the owners that Cut Bop will be leaving. Cut Bop owner, not Cut Bop owners, the landowners and Mr. Delahunty met with us to talk about this, and I believe there's some credible understanding that Cut Bop will probably leave. The discussion still comes in is that Cut Bop has had some parking problems and storage of their trucks that violated their CUP. And so I have some concerns that one is we have to treat it as Cut Bop is presently there until they vacate. And that could change the scenario. But the other thing, even above Cut Bop leaving, is that there's the other half of the place. And this former building has limited parking. And so my cautionary tale in that discussion with them is we need to balance the needs of the art studio, which I agree there's some credibility that the parking that we have at our table is quite aggressive. That does come from some past history, not on studios, but parking on Main Street has been a bane of the city in the past. And the city's been very sensitive to make sure Main Street uses have adequate parking. So that's maybe some of the reasons why some excess shows up into the code. I wasn't here at the time the code was adopted, but nonetheless, I think there's some reason to maybe consider a reduced parking, but it comes down to understanding the parameters of the art studio and what they're willing to commit to so that we ensure that they have enough needs met for their, but we also need to leave open that the landowners may rent to someone else, and it may not be somebody that just needs 5 stalls like Cutbop. So, because Cutbop's a limited catering, they really just have a couple of employees in their trucks. What if we have something else that requires more? And so, yeah, I think you're right. General retail, general uses are 4 per 1,000. Our office uses in Centerville are 5 per 1,000. But this is a small site with limited parking, and you can see that once they decided to divide the single building into 2 users, it introduces this contention and competing for parking.
I have a couple questions, and maybe this is something that the applicant can answer. Can I ask that? Is that okay?
Does anyone have any objection to inviting the applicant back to answer some questions?
No.
Sorry, everything's all weird with these Zoom.
I know.
objections.
Okay. Seeing shaking of heads, if Mr. Delahunty, if you're still there and want to put yourself back up on the video, there you are. Okay, go ahead, Becky.
Can you tell me this art studio, I know the calculation is based upon the students and the employees. With it being personal instruction, is this something where the students are we going to have 23 cars coming, or is it going to be a drop-off situation where people are going to be coming, dropping off a child to have instruction and then leaving?
Our goal, my studio is for children, and my target clientele is children from 3 to 10 years old. That's who I go after, and that's who we market. And so they can't even drive. So it will be a drop-off situation. I do also go for youth, again, below 16, and families. So families usually show up in groups. You know, if you average groups of 4, if I have, based on plumbing code, I can only put 25 people total in the building, including it. So families come in 4, I'm only going to need, what, 5, 6 stalls as it comes with families. You know what I mean? It's just not that big of a space. And so that's the way I see it. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I just was wondering about that use.
Let me follow up on that question then, because from my perspective, the concern would be less about the drop off. Or the dropping off. It would be more about the picking up, right? The bunch of parents who are there 5 to 10 minutes before class is done, waiting to pick up their kids. I watch my daughter's dance studio, and almost nobody is there until 10 minutes before the end of class, and then you have a million cars parked outside waiting to pick up their kids. Have you thought through how that would work?
Well, yes, it is on a corner. It does have 2 really nice entrances. So one onto Main Street and one onto 2nd South. So the flow through the parking lot works better than most dance studios. I've also had that experience of taking my daughters to dance class, and it's miserable. This particular property does have a good flow where you can go right in and right out at 2 locations to increase the parking in and out. Also, in our experience, they come in groups. You know, as you've picked up your daughter, you're probably picking up 4, at least when I've done it, sorry, it's always with neighbors. And you pick up 2, 3, 4 kids at a time, which reduces that car load and reduces that demand. Also, with the current owner or current adjoining tenant, their hours of operation are opposite of mine. So actually their stalls are usually available with the exception of the 3 that they park their truck. Well, I guess they don't even park the 3 according to Mr. Schneider in their parking stalls. So their 5 stalls will be available in my peak hours of operation as well. And so that actually doubles our stalls. And I know that might change in the future, but according, like I said, Mr. Snyder also said that we have to consider today's use, not what's coming in the future. It's kind of a catch-22 there. I can't meet today's use and everything in the future. Also, that leaves 5 stalls remaining in the future for whatever use, retail, office, whatever comes in. And we'll have to explore that in the future and put that burden on the future user, like I'm bearing that burden now. You know what I mean? I'm having to prove it. So yes, those are my thoughts of it. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
Thank you very much. While we have you on screen, does anyone else have any other questions for the applicant? No, seeing shaking heads. All right, thank you, Mr. Delahunty. If you'll go ahead and mute. I don't know, is there a better term for that on video? Okay, so before I open it up for discussion, any further questions for staff?
My question is, I know in previous parking situations, like the Bridge Church situation, when they were down west, we talked about them having neighboring agreements with, you know, landowners to be able to have parking stalls. And we never take into account any kind of on-street parking. Is that correct? Because there is some on-street parking on that that south side. So that's not going to be taken into account as well. And we're just short one parking stall. Is that what I'm reading right in the report?
So it depends on which section you'd like to look at. They've proposed 19 stalls, but did not provide dimensions. So those would need to be verified to see if 19 stalls is even possible.
Okay.
Per our code.
I've got a question for staff. The applicant is the tenant. So my question to staff is, can we provide approvals, not saying that we are, but can we provide approvals specific to tenants and the term of their lease? Or should we be really viewing this from the lens of we're providing a building owner, a landlord, approval for the entire property? I just want to make that clarification.
So for this particular application, it's only connected to Suite A and this particular tenant. If the property owner were to come and apply, then we could expand the parking modification. But since this is just the tenant who is applying, we can only put it towards this tenant at this suite.
So
Okay.
when their lease expires or is terminated, if there was an approval given, it would also expire with that lease term.
That's correct.
If you tie the parking modification to that specific user.
So do we require a memorandum of lease to be recorded against the property? What do we do to memorialize that or track it?
Usually, correct. Usually what happens is in the motion that is passed to approve the parking modification, one of the items is saying this particular tenant at this particular site. And then if anything changes, the zoning administrator has leeway to, if intensity changes after that, then the zoning administrator has a little bit of leeway. Otherwise, it always comes right back to the planning commission.
Okay, thank you.
And it's tracked through the business licensing program. Everything's flagged there for the tenant. So if somebody comes back in to that new suite and it's something else, we will know it's a new user and make the decision accordingly.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? If not, I'll open it up for discussion.
So I'll just go right into the discussion. This is Spencer, but number one, I think it'd be great to have a use in a vacant space on Main Street. I think we'd all like occupied spaces. I think I've got some general concerns with the application because there's inconsistencies with it. For example, in the application, and as Mr. Delahunty said, he's kind of targeting for a younger population, but it also in the application refers to youth and adults. And so I think there's a concern about what age of individuals are actually going to show up, and the notion that your employees are going to walk to the property as opposed to drive you may get a new employee that is driving from another location. So there's some inconsistencies there. When you have 33 seats there in your space, but you're only trying to have a limited amount of parking, I think there's some challenges there too. And I would make the point on other city references, and I don't know if staff's looked at this, but when we're talking about a general office use as opposed to a instructional, educational classroom use, they're different uses in terms of parking. And so I don't want for us as a planning commission, without our staff going out and reaching out to all these other municipalities, to assume that table is an accurate representation to what other cities are actually enforcing for that type of use. So those would be my just general comments.
This is Commissioner Kerr. Can I go next?
Yes, go for it.
So I'm sensitive to this idea that it's too much parking. I've seen it in Layton, and I've seen other incidents where it feels like as our culture seems to have fewer cars per capita, that our parking standard might be too draconian. However, I don't feel that this is the forum for that. Our job is to follow the code. We're supposed to protect the code and to a degree the public's interest, but we don't represent the public, we represent the code. And so if it doesn't meet the code, it doesn't meet the code. We're not here to make those changes, even though it might be a great idea. Maybe, who knows? We don't opine on that right now. This is, does it follow the code? The answer is no. As a result, I would say that it does not comply, and therefore is not ready yet for an authorization.
I'd actually agree with that. I think that, the recommendation, I think, in the staff report is to table and to give time for, a parking study, which I think is probably a good idea, but also maybe to give the applicant a chance to potentially review neighboring, there's an actual word for it, adjoining property, cross parking easements or something like that. And explore that as another option as well. But I agree, now is not the time to discuss what the appropriate level of parking is. That's a different thing that I think we still need to do, because it seems like in my years on the planning commission, we talk about parking a lot, and it'd be nice to be able to kind of pin that down a bit and maybe prevent so many of these applications from coming through. But in the meantime, I would support the recommendation in the staff report to table.
Yeah, and I feel like this, we've had some parking modification requests, and generally when they've come, they've been complete, and they've had applicants who have looked at these alternative opportunities with neighbors, or, done their parking study or different things like that. I really like the idea of this use in that facility. I like the idea of having that in our city. But I feel like the application is just a little bit incomplete as far as we don't know the size, if they can actually fit that amount of stalls based on, we haven't seen any dimensions. They haven't reached out to adjoining, neighboring, whatever that word is, like you said, properties to see about having some sort of parking agreement. And there has not been a study. So generally, when we've allowed these types of things to come through, there has been some significant effort to show or to prove that, yes, there should be sort of a something that we can allow that is different than what our code would allow. So I think if we had that information, it would be a lot easier for us to make that call. But without that information, I feel a little bit uneasy about making a call.
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Wright on that. I think it's a great use. I think it's be great to see that building filled. But I think we need to see those complete applications, some studies, some additional studies performed. I think it's important to note that this doesn't mean we're saying no. It's just saying, hey, let's do some additional look at this a little bit differently, provide some additional data, and let's revisit it. Because I'd love to see it happen, but I agree. I think we need to make sure we're following the city code here. And I think some studies, some cross parking easements, or at least the potential for that would help us finalize our decision on this.
Can I say one more thing, Chair Heyman?
Yes, and then I think Christina wanted to say something. So go ahead, Mason, and then Christina, you can take the next turn.
Okay, I just wanted to I am sympathetic to the applicant's position that he may feel like he's having to bear a burden based on Cup Bop's CUP, because in essence, Cup Bop, if they were to stay and those trucks were to still be in that parking, in that parking lot, and that's going to be a problem for how we would solve this parking situation. So in a sense, he as an applicant has to bear an additional burden because we've given a concession to Cup Bop. So as we're moving forward, if this were to be tabled, I think it's important that we highlight that whatever proposed solution that it comes back with, we try to split the difference so that either tenant, no matter what their use, has a fair proportion of that parking lot, and that we don't allow this applicant, for example, to have too much of a concession, which may have happened with Cup Bop, because Cup Bop is a bit of a limiter in the fact that they have all of those food trucks that have to be stored there under certain circumstances.
Yeah, what I was going to say is I totally agree with everyone. I love this idea. I think we need something like this in our city, and I'm all for it. But I agree that more studies need to be done with the parking and all that. I think the applicant has done a great job, but I think more needs to be done. There's inconsistencies. But I also, like Commissioner Carr said, that we also need to look beyond the future with another applicant. If this can, be solved with both of them or whatever with the parking. So I totally agree. I'm excited. I think this would be great. But I think more needs to be looked at and further explored with this.
And I'm just going to chime in and say I agree with almost everything universally that has been said. It's a very exciting use for this space, but I think that I'm inclined to follow staff's recommendation and to table the proposed parking modification subject to the applicant bringing us back the additional things that staff has requested. Any further discussion?
Yeah, one quick thing along those lines then, and there's the proposed motion in the staff report that mentions this parking study. Do we need to update that motion to include potentially the neighboring parking option? Or how do we address that?
I think that that's something that the applicant can choose to bring back if they want to do so. I don't know that we need to require them to do that. Lisa or Mackenzie, do you guys feel differently about that?
I think it's the applicant can determine what.
Lisa, your connection is not great, my friend. I wonder if we should have Lisa just call in via video or via audio.
You can chat on the side. There's like a chat button on the bottom. If you push that chat button, it gives us like a panel on the side, and you can actually type out a response if you care. Lisa, that's easy.
I'm going to try and log in with my iPhone.
Oh, okay. But I think that nod at me if I was right in that this is with regards to the shared parking, that's something that the applicant can choose to do or not, but we as a city aren't going to tell them one way or the other what they should do. Yes, okay. I'm going to take that as a yes nod.
I see nodding, yeah.
Yes, okay, all right. If there's any further discussion or debate, if not, the chair will entertain a motion.
I got it. I hereby make a motion to table, what does it say? I hereby make a motion to table action of the proposed parking modification as submitted by the applicant and direct the applicant to submit items 1 through 3 in the staff report.
I second.
I think Thomas got in first, so we'll take that as a second. It's
Yes.
been moved and seconded. Any further discussion or debate?
Commissioner Kerr, I would propose to modify that motion so that subsection 3 is modified to add the language "if still in effect."
If
Sounds good to me.
I know Lisa doesn't like friendly amendments, but I'm gonna allow that friendly amendment. Are you okay with that, Kevin?
Yes.
Okay. Any further discussion or debate? If not, let's take a roll call vote. I'll start with the top left corner, Commissioner Daly.
Aye.
Myself, aye. Commissioner Summerhays,
Aye.
Commissioner Wright,
Aye.
Commissioner Kier,
Aye.
Commissioner Hunt,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilcox.
Aye.
Great. That motion passes. So appreciate the applicant, and we will watch for additional materials from them. Okay, moving to the second item on our agenda. This one is also an administrative decision, but with a public hearing. We're being asked to consider a conceptual site plan, Legacy Crossing at Parish Lane, lots 2 and 3. I'll turn the time over to staff.
Okay, that aerial photo show up on your screen? I've been assigned to
Yeah.
cover this one. The site we're looking at is that kind of vacant dirt area south of the Megaplex Theater that you see on the screen. It's the area east of the storage sheds, if you're familiar with the storage sheds area. I'll start by maybe picking up my paragraph at staff recommendation. I'm going to be a little bit apologetic. This is a project that's been going on at a staff level for a little while now, in the sense the applicant's been doing a lot of exploring different ideas and options for this property. This property is at the end of that cul-de-sac you see on the screen. It's actually 2 lots, and if you look at the original configuration, it's a little bit oddly shaped. You have lot 2 would be directly south of the Megaplex. And on original approval, if you by chance looked at the development agreement, was a restaurant pad site. And then lot 3 is to the south of that, and it was a medium box site. The little triangular piece that you see to the left of your screen or to the west was slated to be a detention area within the project. So this project is part of the theater site. It's not independent of its own accord. And so it's zoned commercial very high. It has an overlay of a PD or a planned development. They received approval for a customized zone for this project. And the development agreement lists a lot of uses, and retail and office space are listed uses, as well as some restaurant. And there are a few limitations on automobile dealerships and repair in the development agreement. Overall, their proposal is office and retail, and we can take a look at that. I'll stop sharing this, and let's see. I'll try and share. Let's see, coming up. I want to share. Which one? No, that's not it. I had a picture here, but it's not showing up. So I'll share their site plan that is submitted into your packet. If you can see the pan zoom tool, this would be to the right is to the south of the Megaplex. So the Megaplex is to your left. This was lot 2 with the restaurant pad site. This is lot 3 with the medium box. and this is the detention area. So I'll reorient you from the aerial photo that you saw. The proposal is these first three buildings to the left would be retail uses. This more square building would be their office use location. As far as uses, they're listed within the development agreement, so we find it consistent with that requirement. It's kind of interesting because this project is still part of the PDO as far as cross access, cross ability to use properties, expectations in design, contributing to their fair share of the landscaping. But one of the amendments they reference in the report is amendment number 4. It removed lots 2 and 3 from the parking count of the development. And so the parking counts for the project, they're independent now and are subject to our parking tabulation within the zoning ordinance. They're mostly there with the parking. The calculation is a little bit reversed. So they're short, I think it was 29 stalls, if I remember in the staff report. But I think from my perspective at this point, there are some adjustments that have to take place regardless. And so I think the ability to independent park is not a serious consequence. Part of that discussion and why it may not be a serious consequence is you take the retail building that's located down here towards the bottom. It's a 3-suite retail. That's located in the detention area. This detention area, even though it's listed as part of the larger project, this detention is solely for the water drainage of lot 2 and 3. It's independent of its need to accept storm drain water. That other detention out by the corner of Parish Lane and 1250 West handles the detention for the rest of the project. So it's interesting, looking back nearly a decade, the plat note did not define the pond size for the detention for lots 2 and 3. It said that would be handled later, and that could vary in its size and in dimensions and location based on when lots 2 and 3 come in for development. There's a question that staff has, and I think this is probably something logistically to work out. You see on the plan, they propose 2 alternative detentions for lots 2 and 3. They call this the upper ground detention. And then on the west or the north side of the first retail building, they have the lower detention. But the plat still puts this triangular area as a detention easement. And so if we are going to not just look at size and shape of the detention basin, as long as it meets capacity, they are changing the location, but they're changing the location outside of the easement, which is probably doable from an engineering standpoint. It still comes down to the question that there's a detention easement listed on the plat. And we need to answer the question, is the language allow that much flexibility? Or are we going to have to move that building or eliminate that building in order to manage the easement area dedicated on the plat? So I think that's something in flux on how we answer that question. And I know at some point in time, we need Lisa to weigh in on if she's been able to research anything on the original approvals for the project. The other things I think just to highlight, this project was heavily designed, and so they've submitted their preliminary building elevations for the project because that's part of trying to identify what are the development concerns under the PDO. I met with the developers this morning in a Zoom meeting. They indicated that this wasn't required in a conceptual plan. They don't necessarily have to provide elevations in detail yet at the conceptual level, but with the PDO, it's really helpful. So I encourage them to submit these elevations. And I raise the concern about particularly the office building. They indicated, let me just kind of scroll down. Do you see that change in that elevation on your share screen? They have these elevations here. I think for the most part, they predominantly they meet the expectations, the uses of materials, uses of the colors, the articulation. I raised a little bit of issue with the office because there's a prominence of glass. Some of the other buildings have a prominence of glass, but there's been this interpretation in the Shorelands Commerce Park, which is further north. We tied the Shorelands Commerce Park as an option for them, and it does allow some metal and glass in the Shorelands Commerce Park. But we also have elevations that have a predominant use of more base materials than glass. And so I raised that as a kind of a highlight flag that they maybe need to reconsider the office. I think you weigh that out as a commission, but I can tell you from the meeting I had with them, these are preliminary SketchUps. This is the direction they're heading, but these are also open for their modification. So I'm probably a little stronger in the report because I just didn't know how committed they were to the proposed elevations and materials. The other elements I raise are a lot of details on percentages. Lots 2 and 3, they contribute a significant portion of the overall project's landscaping expectations. I think the detention is a place where there's a heavy weight of that landscaping for the shared on these lots. They're proposing a lot of landscaping. We just need to make sure that they meet those minimums. Again, the parking, make sure that they adjust that accordingly. The one item on the buildings I bring up is the office building exceeds the 45 foot height limitation, but the CVH zone and the development agreement agree that the CVH zone ability to increase height is available through a conditional use permit. We've issued one for the existing office to the north and also for the theater flies for the theater. And so I think, you know, still the argument, does it create an impact? So we could review that along with final site plan at some point in time and determine that. But I don't see that exceeding that height right now is a red flag. So I think the last issue I bring up, probably that maybe some design elements, is this pedestrian path. There was a heavy expectation in this PDO that all the areas get connected with the independent pedestrian path. They do address the expectation on the exhibits to that first retail building. And you do have a pedestrian path circulating around with landscaping to all the other buildings. The question that I raised in the report is whether that was sufficient exchange for what the original exhibit provided to the meeting box. And I think that's something you can have a discussion about with the applicant. But since my understanding is the retail is more spec at this point than having end users, there's probably some adjustments could be made. And I think that's part of the feedback from the Planning Commission is to what degree do you want to give them further direction to meet the original expectations of the PDO? Normally, just kind of concluding, normally I think we would have been a lot further along in our design. This COVID-19 has created a little bit of hiccup in communication with applicants and staff. We're just coming online as of last week, getting the Zoom meetings going, getting people with connections to work from home, because we've not been able to meet at City Hall. That's been locked for general public use. And so I was hoping we'd be further along. We're not, but I think a lot of them are details. And other than a couple of major highlights about this building in the detention, I think most of them can be worked out. So I leave you 2 options in the staff report. If you're concerned that advancing to a final would lend a significant change to the development, you certainly could table. I think they're aware of the staff report and the concerns, and that's what I heard this morning from them, that they know that this is a little bit fluid, but they'd like to proceed on. And I heard at one point in time, they can correct me if they're wrong, if they have to get rid of the retail building, the detention, or move it, they're willing to. So I think you seek that communication, but this is really conceptual. It's a time to, this one was pretty detailed. We had to go through the PDO, which is its own custom zone, and that's the predominant regulatory tool. We added a few things from the CVH that weren't amended by that, and just the issue of amending the plat regarding detention. So staff is comfortable with you choosing either direction, but I do think this was a good exercise, at least in the staff report, since we couldn't meet. Now everybody can be on the same page for expectations. So choose which direction you want to go, but I wouldn't be offended if you moved them forward either.
Thanks, Corey. I'm going to start with a question for staff because it's my major question as I was reviewing this. There she is, Lisa. With regard to the questions that staff has included in the report for you or the city engineer with regard to building and encroachment within the detention area, is that something that you've had the opportunity to look at yet? And can you weigh in on that? Or is that something that you still need to research in order to respond to? We're not having great luck with Lisa. Can you?
So from my knowledge on this, the plat would need to be amended. They would, I think if they can amend the plat to pull that detention basin off of that or relocate it, then they would probably be able to, but they would have to amend the plat. I believe that's how it would have to be done, at least.
So can you hear me now? I put it back on the computer.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, I think it would be problematic to put a building in the detention basin easement area and will likely need a plat amendment if they want to do that. In addition, they're proposing putting the detention elsewhere, which would probably need to be covered by an easement as well. So at the conceptual stage, that's probably my opinion, yes, that it would be problematic to put a building in that area.
Okay. Thanks. Any other questions for staff?
I do.
Go ahead.
So this could be for Lisa or Corey. How common are underground detention basins in Centerville, and what kind of systems have we seen used here? I have heard anecdotally that sometimes they're not great, that they can silt up over time and it's hard to clean. So I'm just curious if that's an issue that we need to be considering at all.
I think that's good feedback. I can try to answer it and then Lisa can weigh in. I wouldn't say that the underground detention is common in Centerville, particularly if you look at our target RDA area and you see where all of the detention basins are located on the smaller out pads to the project. So typically we daylight the detention facilities. And so that's a normal. But your Coles development, if you look right along the frontage road, you'll see the loading dock, but in front of the loading dock is another detention basin, and it outfeeds across the freeway, and all of their detention sits in underneath the parking lot of Coles. And so our city engineer has at times approved the use of underground detention, but I would say that it's not very common.
So as a follow-up, it is compliant with city code?
Yes.
Okay.
I've got a couple questions, and just a follow-up on it. As a developer, I have used underground storage, and so I don't have necessarily a problem with it from a technical perspective, and maybe Commissioner Hunt could help us out given his engineering expertise. But do we know what the water table is out there? And if we do underground detention tanks, is there a concern that they'll actually float when they're not full? So
That's
just a
a great
two-part question.
That's a great question. I don't remember back in the original development where the level of groundwater is, but it is fairly, I don't want to say shallow, because they were able to install the storm drain systems in the canals that removed a lot of the water that created the wetlands. And so it did drop the water at the surface area. I don't know how deep it goes. I know they had to preload part of the theater site because of compaction issues and worries, but then they abandoned that and changed their footing design on the other half of the theater. So I would say the groundwater is present, but it may be still 6 or 7 feet, below. So that would be the discussion: is can they?
Yeah, I I did the design of the Maverick that's just to the west there, and if I remember, groundwater was on average about 6 feet deep. But it, you know, with the spring runoff, it fluctuates quite a bit as you move further west. But I don't think I mean, there are requirements that I'm sure the city engineer will look at. The bottom of the underground basin has to provide a certain amount of distance from what the geotechnical report states the high water is, or the static water table is what they call it. So I'm sure, you know, that will all be looked at in engineering, and it's usually not a problem at all. They are super expensive, but to get some additional buildings there, I can see why they'd want to go underground instead of above ground. But
That would be my concern, is just related to the water table. I mean, for a reference, we developed the Farmington Ranches residential project. As part of that, we had to install a sewer pump station, which required essentially an underground storage tank. And in order to ensure that our concrete box, you wouldn't think would float, but it would with the water table. So we actually had to fill the tank, the holding tank, with water as we did backfill and compactions. So I would just, from a staff recommendation standpoint, that's just something we want to be really closely tied in with our city engineer on. Again, I'm not opposed to it. I just want to make sure that it's clearly communicated from our land use staff to our actual engineering staff that that's a concern as it relates to our general infrastructure as a city.
Does anyone else have any questions for staff before we invite the applicant to speak? Yes, Becky.
So I know that in the staff report, it says, you know, the PDO permitted uses are general restaurant, retail, and office. And when I went back and looked at the plan proposal, it showed originally like a restaurant and then some things. Is just the permitted use is just any of those, or there's no requirement to actually have a restaurant there, obviously, right?
Yeah, there's no specific requirement. Those were conceptually some of the marketed uses that they wanted to chase after. If you remember, they were also looking at entertainment facility in the medium box. Fat Cats was what was done in Ogden. They tried to attract that, but the development agreement, from my reading of it, just opened it up to say general retail, general office, and only had a prohibited section of automobile or other type of destination uses. So they don't have to develop a restaurant.
And for the retail, could any of that retail include, I know we've talked about sort of like the go and grab and go type foods, like, is that retail? Will that prohibit any kind of food services there, or will that could that allow?
I believe it says general restaurant, and so they'd have to not qualify specifically for the fast food. So if you had something like Costa Vida, Cafe Rio, that's my spouse's favorite places, that would be fine. But if you had a drive-through like In-N-Out Burger, then that would be prohibited.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff?
Just one last, sorry, Corey, what you talked about the glass. Does the PD require a specific percentage, or is it just is it pretty arbitrary on the types of materials on the buildings?
That's a great question. It is pretty subjective from my review. The Paris Lane design guidelines do talk about percentages of articulation in their design, but it just said, I think it says, I don't know if it was substantial or prominent, but they said these rock, brick, and then they reference the Parish or the Shorelands Commerce Park. These are the main building materials. And if you look at the project now, there's been quite a bit of subjective review of how much rock gets included or brick gets included. So, I mean, even look at the theater, look at how much stucco is prominent in the building versus the wainscot of the faux stone on it. So
Right.
pretty subjective.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions for staff? If not, we will invite the applicant to come forward. Let's see, I think that Chad Bessinger, there we go. Welcome back.
Chad actually has a big beard. I don't have a beard, so this is Glenn Gersberger.
Glenn, thank you.
I work with Chad.
Go ahead if you'd like to speak to anything that you've heard or the staff report.
Great, thank you. There are a number of things that were issued. Some of them are fairly easy for us to address with our architect and make those changes quite easily. I think that Corey articulated quite clearly, you know, we're here for this conceptual site plan approval or acceptance. We did provide those elevations more as a way to give you an idea where we're headed, a preliminary look at what we anticipate for the site. As you know, retail is morphing every single day, especially since we're now encountering this COVID issue. It's changing all the time. It'll probably continue to change for a long time to come. What we tried to do in our design was to try and incorporate something that could accommodate a wide range of uses for retail, mainly because we just don't know what it'll look like down the road. You know, the original site plan that was created was put together 10 years ago when a standalone restaurant may have worked, I don't know. And then this mid-box retail center, you know, you probably need a good anchor somewhere to make that successful. So we tried to make this as flexible as possible to accommodate not only uses that may come today, but that may come down the road. And certainly as we designed or looked at the preliminary plans for the office building, we, as you can tell, we actually the developer who's done the existing legacy office building as well as the Parish Crossing office building. So you can kind of see succession of 10 years ago what was planned, 3 years ago what was planned, and what we're morphing to today. We want it to be more forward thinking than something that would be stuck a decade ago in design and concept. We're not the Silicon Slopes, but we'd like to kind of portray that we can get there in Centerville, that we can attract the type of tenants that would find that appealing and something that they'd like to come to. So that's kind of the method to the madness of what we're trying to accomplish on the site. Just to address some of the issues that Corey brought up, the parking stalls, we can work with our architect to make those changes and get that back on track quite easily. The detention areas, again, I think when we originally looked at this, obviously, and Spencer alluded to this too, we want to maximize as much as we can on this site to make it feasible, economically feasible. So in looking at the language that's included in the development agreement, there is language there or on the plat that talks specifically about that detention area. And Corey did include it in his report. He says that lots 2 and 4, that the detention basin easement in lots 2 and 4 are for the purposes of the entire development and shall be maintained as such. However, the configuration, location, and dimensions of the ponds can be changed by future developments, as long as the storage capacity is not altered and that the performance is maintained. We kind of interpreted that literally, that if you provided the same amount of detention, that could be spread out over the property, not necessarily in one specific location. But obviously, Lisa and others have voiced an opposite opinion. We'll certainly have to take that into consideration as we finalize the site plan. Office elevations, I think we talked about that. Those are just preliminary in design right now, and we can make whatever modifications are necessary. Again, we want to adopt a more modern feel than what was thought would be appropriate 10 years ago. Height, you know, we're willing to, with the final site plan and final plans that we submit for this project, include a CUP as part of that. So we would seek that conditional use permit. Pedestrian paths. Corey, is it possible to put that site plan back up just quick? I don't know if I have that ability. So for us, the original site plan that was designed, obviously, the pedestrian traffic path came from, yeah, exactly right there, came from the theater and went past the restaurant to that mid box, kind of a straight path through both properties. Because we're redesigning this site plan, our intent is to bring the traffic to the retail space and then direct that traffic around the frontage of those retail spaces, because trying to direct the traffic through that first retail building, the long one that you see just off of the theater, if we were to direct traffic through that to try and access the other buildings, you're actually directing all your pedestrian traffic to the back of those buildings, which I don't think helps activate those areas or creates a good circulation for enhancing the viability of those retail spaces. So what we wanted to do is direct the traffic around the frontage of those units, not through or behind, and then ultimately end up over at the office building. We can also direct that circulation pattern over to those most west buildings if indeed they are acceptable or approved. So hopefully that addresses that circulation a little bit better. But I think those are generally my comments. I would defer to Brock Loomis if he had some additional feedback on the detention area. If he wanted to raise his hand and chime in, he could, if it's okay with you.
Yes, I see him on the line. So he's,
I'm here.
there we go.
And get my video turned on. Oh, apologize. So yeah, Spencer, to your comment and about the underground detention, we've talked to our engineers quite a bit about that. And I know we came in for a DRC and talked to the city engineer as well when proposed that idea, and that conversation came up. We've got geotech reports that show groundwater levels. They vary across the site, but we do feel like they're deep enough that we can make it work. But as we get through this conceptual stage and into the real meat of the design and grading and drainage, we'll see where we land on that and how much that'll affect it. We do have quite a bit of soil out there that we're looking at potentially raising the site up if necessary, to be able to get that detention underground if needed. I know there was also a concern about maintenance on those. We do these on quite a few sites. I'm actually, before being a developer, civil engineer for a number of years, and we definitely designed these into a lot of sites, mainly because of the economics behind it, to be able to free up that land. I don't know in Centerville City if you guys do this, but we have with a lot of cities entered into long-term stormwater maintenance agreements that spell out in the recorded documents how that will be maintained and when it will be maintained. So that's potentially something that could be done here as well if needed.
Thank you very
Chair
much.
Heyman, can I ask a question?
Yes, I was just going to open it up if anyone has any questions for Mr. Gersberger or Mr. Loomis. So go ahead, Mason, you can start.
This is probably for Mr. Loomis. Is it the intent based on this site plan that all of the detention is underground and that land behind the smaller building to the west is not going to be an open air detention basin?
Not necessarily, no. As I talk to our engineers about it, we'll look at all of the options. I mean, it is a lot more cost effective to put it above ground. And
Okay.
So we would probably default to putting as much as we can back there behind that building in an above ground detention basin, and then overflowing into an underground system if needed.
Any other questions for the applicant? I have one question, and it sounds like, Corey has pulled out in our staff report, the PDO is approved with the architectural theme, which contemplated using rock, wood, cement, fiberboard, and accent stucco, but that you could also pull in materials from the Shoreland Park. And it sounds like to me, Mr. Gersberger, that you're looking at that thinking that that's a little dated. that you're trying to kind of move forward. But my question, I mean, the theme is what it is. And so would you anticipate trying to incorporate any of the rock or wood or cement fiberboard sort of main themes into that, or are you?
We would, and if you can, the retail certainly conforms to that today, but the office building, if you look at that closely, that you can see the wood incorporated along the front of the building. You can see some other metal features in the black areas, but it is predominantly glass. You can also see that there's some other cement board type features more on the northeast corner. But again, this is very conceptual for us, very preliminary. So we'll take whatever feedback you can give us and we'll design it to accommodate the design guidelines already set forward. But we want to be as forward thinking as we can in that design. And I think you see that in the Parish Crossing office building that we just completed.
I guess my comment to you would be that I want to encourage you to be forward thinking, but also comply with the architectural theme, you know, and I can't quite tell. I appreciate you for calling out that that was wood because it didn't quite look that way when I looked at it. I'm not going to tell you how to design your building. I'm no designer on that, but I would just say that my concern would be to make sure that it harmonizes everything as a whole and that we don't lose some of the architectural theme requirements in being too forward looking.
I do.
You got to have the balance there. Again, I'm not saying one or the other, just be sensitive to that.
Right.
Any other questions for the applicant? If not, thank you both very much. This has been scheduled for a public hearing. So this is going to be an interesting learning experience for us. So I will take this opportunity to open the public hearing and invite any member of the public who wishes to speak to call the number that is currently on the screen, which is 801-335-8850. I understand that the YouTube, we're on about a 20-second lag. So I'm going to be quiet for just a second and see if anybody calls in to comment.
You're not going to tell us a story for 20 seconds. We have to just sit here and be quiet. Come on, like give us something.
I got nothing, man. I got nothing.
It was a beautiful day today. Beautiful. Did everyone get outside? I mean, like we're all stuck inside, but did everyone get a chance to be outside? It was so pretty.
It was a gorgeous day.
Do we know there's 2 phone numbers that show up on that participant list? Do we know what those are or who those are?
Let's see how to.
Kevin, you're talking about the 631 numbers and the 721 number?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Is one of those. I don't know. How do you guys see? Oh, maybe I just need to click on participants again.
Yeah, participants.
Or you can take it off of like full screen.
Yeah, no, I'm learning Zoom. I'm coming into the times slowly but surely. Okay. I feel like we have allowed enough opportunity for anybody who wants to speak. And thank you, Leah, for throwing that up. I appreciate you for doing that. So seeing no one calling in, I will close the public hearing. Any further discussion or debate on this one? I'm curious, how are you guys feeling about tabling the item versus accepting them and allowing them to go forward?
Go ahead.
Becky, why don't you start?
I kind of feel like I learned a move from Logan before he left to not put a burden on the developer when they've got a lot there for us to see and we can generally kind of tell what's going on. I feel like there are some things that need to be resolved, yes, obviously, but that's okay because we're in a conceptual situation here. I frankly really like the idea of the office building. I've always loved that kind of design, and I think it is a great thing to bring to Centerville. I think as long as, like you said, Chair Heyman, as long as it has some of those design elements that are required. But I really love the glass and the option of, you know, making it feel forward thinking. And I think some of the other issues that are brought up are issues that it sounds like the applicant has already started thinking about, is already starting to work on, and is probably going to be able to be resolved pretty easily.
Kevin, did I hear you were wanting to weigh in next?
No, I think that was Spencer maybe.
Spencer, yeah,
Was it
that's okay, yeah.
Spencer, we'll go to you then.
On the docket is a conceptual site plan, and maybe I should have asked this during the staff questioning, but will we have an opportunity, if we approve this, as a one last glance on a final site plan approval?
Yeah, this is the opportunity for the commission to, and including staff, but mainly for the commission to weigh in on the project and evaluate it against the ordinances and regulatory tools and give them feedback. So you will see this again in a final form, but we usually host the public hearing at this point because we try to eliminate the need to draw up very detailed plans just to have them reversed in a public hearing because we found a golden nugget. So yeah, you'll see this all in a final site plan project with all the details of materials, the storyboard, and obviously this case with their CUP request for the height. So you'll see it in detail and you'll weigh in on the final decision.
Perfect. So my comments would be that the applicant address some of the issues that staff has brought up in terms of, you know, the pedestrian path and how that works into their site. I'm with Becky. I kind of like the design. I don't have a strong feeling towards requiring them to use, again, in my subjectivity, I kind of like the way it looks as they've outlined it. I think it kind of fits in with some of the other buildings that are just recently developed. I wish maybe the theater looked different, but that's a tough one. And in terms of height, I feel good about it, approving a CUP in the future on the height, given the uses surrounding it and the precedent that's been made on the other buildings. So that would be my input.
Thanks. Anyone else want to weigh in on this one? Mason?
Yeah, so I would say that when I read the staff report, I was inclined to table things. I think the applicant's responses have helped clear up a lot of my concerns, but it was a close call. I recognize that COVID has added a layer of difficulty in corresponding between staff and the applicant. I wish that this had been farther along, and probably would have been farther along had we been under normal circumstances. So just noting that it was a close call in terms of readiness and preparedness, I am inclined to say that this should be accepted subject to further refinements and given the fact that we'll see a final.
Yeah, I think that for me, I'm okay to approve a conditional or accept the conditional, I guess, and proceed. It would be different if the issues were very significant issues, or if the applicant were giving, you know, some significant kickback to some of those staff recommendations or the deficiencies highlighted by staff. So for me, I don't see that as a problem. I feel like that'll get taken care of. So I'm okay to accept and move on.
I'm actually very much in Mason's camp. I was really on the fence as well, but given what has been discussed, I feel comfortable moving forward, and I will hereinafter dubs it the Logan Johnson rule. The Logan Johnson.
When I talk to him tomorrow, I'll let y'all know he's mentioned that.
Mason does not like the Logan Johnson rule. I can already tell you that based off our last commission meeting. And I don't disagree. I don't disagree.
Any other comments on this one? Discussion? If not, the chair will entertain a motion.
I'm happy to make a motion. Let me just get to the right.
I was gonna say, yeah, I'm looking here.
It doesn't follow right on the page, does it, Corey? Where is the staff recommendation? Let's see.
It's at the very bottom. I've got it if you want me to do it.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
The commission, I propose the commission to accept the conceptual site plan submittal for the Legacy Crossing lots 2 and 3 conceptual site plan, provided that the applicant address matters as described in the staff report of April 3rd, 2020, with suggested reasons for action A in the staff report.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion or debate? If not, we'll take a roll call vote. We'll start with the bottom video this go around. I don't know, maybe you guys have different.
It's different.
Is it in a different order? Okay, well then you're going in my bottom order. So I'm going to start with Commissioner Hunt.
Aye.
Commissioner Wright,
Aye.
Commissioner Kier,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilcox. I think you're on mute. Almost.
Aye.
All right, there we go. Commissioner Summer Hayes,
Aye.
Commissioner Daly,
Aye.
and myself is also an aye. All right, thank you all. Moving to the next item on our agenda, item number 3. This is also an administrative decision. We're considering a conceptual site plan at Parish Creek Business Park, Building B. So I will turn the time over to staff.
Thank you, Chair Heyman and members of the commission. I'm going to start sharing my screen, so just a moment. Okay. Nod if you can see that. Great. Okay. So this site, so this is the Parish Creek Business Park Building B conceptual site plan amended. This site has a lot of history. It was first, the first application for a PDO was in 2011, which was approved and then expired. And this go around is new owners, and they received a PDO approval in 2017, in March of 2017. So this, let's see if I'm on the right thing. Okay, so this is an application to amend the original lots 3 and 4. I think it's lots 3 and 4. Yes. To combine those two lots originally, let me see if I can find the right. Originally, there was 3 buildings in this section. All right, Zoom is a little complicated. Just a moment. So originally, there were buildings B, C, and D in this, and this is the 2 separate lots. And in comparison, this is the proposal to eliminate building C and D and to expand building B and to combine those 2 lots. Staff has a few items of note for discussion. But first, I would just like to preface this that staff recommends tabling this to receive further information. So first off, the original PDO, which I'll go back to, stated a few specific things, mainly that building B, which is along, so this is Legacy Parkway right here, that building B have a more pleasing aesthetic because it is so much on view to Legacy Parkway, as well as having a buffer, a landscaping buffer that more closely matches the Shorelands Commerce Park landscaping requirements so that the 2 sides of Legacy Parkway didn't look vastly different. So that's item number 1. Item number 2, in this original PDO, let's see if I can find it. it references the original application. Let's see. The share screen button is in the way. There we go. Okay, so it mentions several things, design elements, including low density, generous open spaces, strong view corridors, boulevard main streets, and landscaped parking lot islands. And then this line here, great care has been taken to maximize the visual view corridors from the Legacy Parkway. So that's in the PDO approval, this narrative. So the new proposal doesn't address the landscaping requirements. It is only just under 1% shy of what was approved. So that obviously, so this is the approval amount of landscaping, 17.3%, which is below that. And so that needs to be addressed. The other item, another item, there are no proposed easements in their application. And in the original proposal, there is a large sewer easement that runs along the lot line here. And so that would need to be vacated and put somewhere else. So that needs to be addressed. And then the final item that I would like to mention, a site plan amendment came before Planning Commission in November for this business park to make other amendments, but the main amendment was in the original PDO. It mentions walkways and pedestrian paths through the wetlands, connecting to the wetlands and connecting to 1250 West, which goes up and over Legacy Parkway. And that item, that application was tabled and directing the applicant to go to City Council and to receive feedback from them on what would be sufficient changes and improvements to the landscape if they got rid of that pathway. So that hasn't happened. So they have not provided a narrative as to what other upgrades to meet the PDO expectation they would put in to replace that pathway. Let's see. And my last item, oh.
Go ahead. I thought you were finishing up. Go ahead.
I'm almost done. We have run into a problem with parking in this business park as a whole, because the original proposal in the PDO was to gear this towards warehouses, offices, and startup space, incubator space. For the most part, there have been more intense uses coming in as tenants into building A and building E. And so there is a lack of parking in those two buildings. And I know that the applicant has told me that they have some potential tenants for building B that might not fit into those warehouse, office, or incubator space types. And so staff would recommend that a parking study based off of projected uses rather than past PDO uses, so that we can get a greater handle from the beginning on parking, so that each tenant isn't burdened with coming through with a parking modification.
Chair Heyman, if I could just weigh in on background and add to that when you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just for the commissioners that may not be aware, this Parish Creek Business Park became a PDO primarily for the reason, if you see this long cul-de-sac, when it hits on the other side of the Bluebird bus station, it's double the distance of our allowed cul-de-sac. We only allow 400 feet to cul-de-sac, and this one well exceeds that. So they obtained a PDO to try to resolve that problem, because this was a dead-end property. And part of that exchange of the PDO is, rather than rely just on the concrete masonry unit and decorative block, that they would come up with a design theme for the project. And the design theme was split into kind of two parameters. The first one was the entry here on the left of your screen. That would have a typical well, it keeps moving. I would have a typical business park entry. And so you have this boulevard, you have this split island. Part of the split island is because it was a one-way, each side of the island functions as a normal street. It's wide enough to take two-way traffic. And that was the idea. If something happened into the business park on one side, emergency personnel could stage on one side of that boulevard and let everybody else on the other side. And so they split the project to have IH zoning to the south with the first two buildings coming in. And then the other three buildings that were originally proposed, that oriented to the Legacy Parkway. And the PDO pulled in the Shorelands Commerce Park expectations for some landscaping themes and for some building design. And so I think that's what McKinsey is trying to raise a question about, is they're finding more practical uses for the project, but they've not really addressed the issue of the design of the project. And so I think you have two weighting factors here. One, what was the PDO expectations and what feedback do we want to give them that they do or don't match the original PDO design expectations? But I also think McKinsey brings up a great point that this was supposed to be flex warehouse office, predominantly warehouse. And we're seeing a lot of different type of uses. And so we've got a kids playhouse, we've got a vocational school for a car company. And these uses start occupying this parking, which was calculated at 1 per 1,000 square feet of warehouse. And so we started running out of parking. And so our issue, if we want to do this amendment, is, are we moving away from the flex warehouse? Because if we are, then we need to reset the master plan for the parking for this amendment. And so I think those are the two things you look at, design and parking, and weigh in from the developer what they'd like to do.
Thanks, Corey and Mackenzie. Any questions for staff? Oh, okay, seeing shaking heads. We'll go ahead and invite the applicant to speak. I think, let's see. The applicant listed is Lolo Tanifa. I don't know if I've said that correctly.
Yes, that's correct.
Perfect. Do we have you on just via, or you're welcome
Yeah,
to
I have,
via screen or not?
Yeah, I actually have Nick Brady. He's the architect on here that did the study on the parking. We are.
Can you, before we get started, just because we don't have your picture and name popping up on this screen, can you identify yourself just for the record?
Yeah, this is Lolo. Can you see me now?
Oh, yes, there we go. Perfect.
This is Lolo Tanifa from Tom Stewart Construction. So, yeah, we are just proposing that building B, just like Mackenzie was giving the information. We do want to apply for a conditional use permit as well for this building. And I'll have Nick Brady give kind of his parking study that he did and what we're trying to do and what we're proposing on that building.
Thanks, Lolo. Yeah, I'm the architect. I'm new to these two lots here. We didn't design the original, but we're working with Tom Stewart Construction / developer to develop this building B, as you see on your screen or saw it previously. We can certainly address those PDO requirements, knowing that obviously the building orientation has changed and landscape requirements obviously will be addressed to accomplish those requirements of the PDO. So we can certainly entertain your feedback on that. And with respect to, as Lolo mentioned, I think it's mentioned on the agenda, I think one of the intentions of this this exercise is to seek a conditional use permit for vehicle storage. Is that correct?
So a CUP isn't currently attached to this application. There's a separate CUP for building E. So a CUP would have to come
Okay, so this is the conceptual site plan. I apologize.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, any questions you have for me, I'd be happy to address at this time.
Do you have any concerns with addressing any of the issues that were raised in the staff report? I mean, you've touched on a couple of them, but there are others that are mentioned in the staff report. Any concern with us tabling this as staff recommends to allow you to go back and address those issues?
No, I think that's really part of our process. We'd like to move forward generally with the concept of a single building, which is in part limited to the square footage because of the certain fire requirements because of that single entrance via the cul-de-sac. So we're limited to a square footage maximum. And that 32,000 square feet is that threshold. So that's one of the reasons we've decided to consolidate into a single building. So it's kind of to the previous one. Is there anything I suppose we would seek, your approval to continue our development of meeting all those requirements of the PDO? I would say likely in similar fashion to the one that was just approved for the legacy. Without tabling anything, I think there's enough information knowing that we can take staff recommendations to meet those requirements of the PDO and the other city ordinances.
Any other questions for the applicant or Mr. Brady? Oh. Seeing none. Thank you very much to both of you. This has been scheduled for a public hearing, so we'll take the opportunity to open the public hearing and invite any member of the public who wishes to speak. Let's see. Here we come with a number. Leah, it's just saying Leah Romero has started screen sharing. I don't see a number coming up yet.
The number's up for me. I can see it.
I can
you
see
see
it.
it?
Yeah, I got a number.
Yeah,
So why can't mine? Hey, will one of you read that number out? Because my screen is just showing black.
801-335-8850.
Perfect. And we'll go ahead and give it a 20-second lag period. I understand we have about 5 people who are watching via YouTube.
Probably just watching for the uniqueness of the whole experience.
Man.
Whatever, they want to see all of our backgrounds. They're so interested in how beautiful my
The washer and dryer, I love them.
The only place for peace and quiet right now, people, the only place. So.
Oh, there it goes. Now I can see it. It just popped up for me. That's maybe I'm on a lag. I just feel bad that my screen feels so dark. All of you are very bright, and I guess I have really awful lighting in this room. We are all going to remember March and April of 2020. This will go down.
Yes. Hey, while we're waiting, on a side note, Corey, can you remind me what the amount, this is totally just because we're killing time. How many allowed residential units is residential high?
Sure. The residential high is a multifamily only zone, so it requires just multifamily development. There are some other uses listed in there, by the way, but if you're talking about density, there's no allowance for single family, so you have to do strictly multifamily. 8 units an acre permitted, and 9 to 12 units an acre conditional use.
Thank you.
Leah, have we had anybody call in on our number?
No, we're good.
Great. We'll go ahead then. Seeing no one calling in, I'll close the public hearing. Any further questions for staff or discussion or debate? I'll ask the same question here. Staff has proposed requesting additional information. Does anybody feel strongly about doing something different.
I'd like to see some additional information. And I remember from before there was the issue with the, like we talked about, the issue with the sidewalk. And so I just think a little bit more information would be helpful.
Yeah, I'll weigh in. I think that the last application, I think that we had more information than we have here, and staff has raised a number of concerns. I would like to see that additional information provided as well.
I agree. In contrast to what Mr. Brady's saying, this application is not nearly as complete as the previous application.
Any other discussion on this one? If not, the chair will entertain a motion. Well, actually, I'll just move that we table this with the directives 1 through 7 in the staff report. And for the reasons that there's not sufficient evidence that the application meets the conditions of PDO approval dated March 21st of 2017.
Second.
But who seconded that? Sorry, I missed it.
It's
Mason.
Mason and the discotheque.
Mason and, oh my goodness. All right. Any further discussion or debate? If not, we'll start with Commissioner Daly.
Aye.
Commissioner Summerhays,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilcox,
Aye.
Commissioner Kerr.
Aye.
Oh, that background man. Commissioner Wright,
Aye.
Commissioner Hunt,
Aye.
and I am also an aye. Okay, which takes us to item number 4 on our agenda. So this is a conditional use permit for inland marine at 1040 North, 950 West, and I will turn the time back over to staff.
Thank you, Chair Heyman and members of the commission. So this is the same applicant, Lolo Tanifa, for the same business park, but for building E. So this is inland marine. They rent boats, and which is a conditional use in the industrial high zone. And so the use is vehicle and equipment rental and sale. So the items I'd like to draw your attention to in the staff report is once again parking. We have had some, we don't have quite enough parking. It's really close, but there isn't sufficient parking provided. And then, so I provided 2 separate options for this one, whether to approve or to table it and request a few more items. And the 2 items that I think would give rise to tabling is impact on persons and properties nearby, especially because it will be going in right next to a children's indoor recreational facility, which is Coconut Cove, which you've probably seen their sign up on the building. And then the loading and unloading of vehicles for rent or for sale, information on where that loading would take place, as well as where, if any boats will be stored outside for show, where those would be placed. But otherwise, it's a conditional use in the zone, and with just a few things, they could meet the requirements of the zoning code.
Mackenzie, do we have, I'm drawing a blank on this particular area. Do we have, I mean, I know that you included a little blurb in the staff report. Can you pull up and put on the screen the area that we're talking about and where the Coconut Cove is located?
Just a moment. Okay. So this here is building E. I might have said building B. I can't remember. So Coconut Cove is here on the northernmost tenant space. which is to the right of the screen. And then Inland Marine is applying for the
Right next
space
door.
just next to it.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions for staff?
Yeah, sorry, I have a quick question. Just help me understand these buildings. The front of these buildings is the west side, or this building is the west side? Is that correct?
So the front is the east side, the side facing I-15. So this, the bottom.
Okay,
So that's where,
that helps.
yeah, so people will drive in here to the south, and then here's the frontage of all those tenants.
All right, where the, yeah, obviously where the parking is would make more sense. Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mackenzie, my question is, do we have more color or context on why there is deficient parking, even though I assume that the parking counts were provided based off of, I believe what Corey said was an IH zone? Are they
Yes.
are they not putting in uses that comply with our zoning
So-
ordinance?
They're putting in uses that comply with the zone, but not uses that were originally in the PDO proposal. So they're not disallowed from the PDO, but the original PDO assumed office, warehouse, and incubator space, which is once again office. So the uses so far have been very different and much more high intensity parking requirements than that. We have a technical school facility, indoor recreation, the vehicle use. And then there is a warehouse tenant in this space, in this building. But for the most part, the tenants are requesting higher intensity uses than what was originally planned for parking.
And as a follow-up to it, and I think, and I'm just trying to remember in the staff report, if we're renting vehicles or boats or whatever else it might be, are they being stored in the facility itself? I don't see any loading docks in the rear. Where are they going to be keeping those, or are they off-site?
Right, and that is a question for the applicant.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Heyman, can I just weigh in on the first question Commissioner Summerhays raised?
Yes, please do.
The uniqueness of the Parish Creek is it's an I-8 zone and allowed all of the uses of the I-8 zone. So there's no restriction of uses. So the answer is the uses that are being approved there are still within the I-8 zone category. I think the struggle is that the anticipated parking relationship to the size of the building was calculated originally for small office, large warehouse. And the I-8 zone allows a lot more than just that small flex space office use. And so you're seeing other uses that can come in and they start using up the parking. And one of the communications we've had with the applicant is that you're running out of space. And they agreed in a letter to staff saying, yeah, we'll address this space later as we find other uses. Well, now for this particular building, we're at the end and they're using up most of the spaces for all the other uses. And this last remaining space is running short. And I think it's just a consequence of they've decided to move away from the flex office, and that is now using up the bank of parking that they've had.
So they could comply technically, and from a practical business perspective, they may shoot themselves in the foot because it becomes unmanageable for their tenants.
Correct.
Any other questions for staff? If not, we'll go ahead and invite the applicant back. It looks like this is the same Mr. Tanifa. So we'll invite you to speak to this matter.
Although if you'd like, I can jump in. Mackenzie, do you happen to have the site plan with the additional 5 stalls that were added in the back?
I don't think I have it uploaded. Let me see if I can get to it.
Okay. In the meantime, maybe just a little description on this inland marine tenant. They do from what I understand, they do store their boats. It's basically from what I understand, it's a club where people can, it's kind of like a country club type of a deal where you have equity membership and you can come and pick up your boat. Am I on the right track, Lolo? And use it for the weekend or whatever purposes you need.
Can you hear me?
Like,
Can you hear me?
yeah.
Yeah, so they'll have storage inside the warehouse, and then there's people coming in and out and picking up their boats. That's right.
Right. There's no intent to store or display boats on the exterior of the building in any of those parking stalls. And yeah, I fundamentally, the way I see this is basically at least a half of this space is for, well, with a showroom area for their public entrance area. They've got a decent sized showroom, which would basically be warehousing boats. It won't be, I don't imagine this being heavily trafficked. It'll be the occasional visitor on a Thursday or Friday to pick up a boat and off they go for the weekend. So I don't know that there will be a heavy demand more than maybe, a standard type warehouse. I believe that with this particular type of space and the way that they're utilizing the function of their business, it's less of a showroom for dealership type purposes and more of a showroom just for their clientele.
Where will the loading and the unloading happen? Is that going to happen at the rear of the building?
Correct. If you can see there's a number 5, it's hard to see a little bit in that bubbled area, in that bay that they're proposing to take, which is that second jog from the right. There's an overhead door, a single overhead door, I believe, on that side. So they'd just be trailering them in through that door. There are actually 2 overhead doors there.
I don't know that I'm following that, but any other questions for the applicant? Let me ask you, have you talked to the Coconut Cove folks on the other side, proposed what it is that you're looking to put here? Has there been any feedback from the Coconut Cove tenants?
No, I haven't addressed that with them. They are familiar with the boats because we did have boats in the warehouse for a little bit, but they do know it's there.
Any other questions for the applicant? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. This matter is also scheduled for a public hearing, so we'll take the opportunity to open the public hearing and invite any member of the public who wishes to speak. You're welcome to join our meeting by calling 801-335-8850. And seeing Leah, has anybody called in to our number?
Well, the mayor
The
did.
mayor. Oh, and I got your message on that. So we'll invite the mayor to come speak with us after we get done with this application. This is the last application before the minutes and the community development director's report. So we'll invite the mayor to call back here in just a minute. But have we had anybody else call in on the public line?
No.
Okay, then seeing no one calling in, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Any further discussion or debate on this? Questions for staff?
Yeah, quick question then, I guess, for staff. So we just saw a site plan with 5 additional parking stalls on the back side. Was that not included in the discussion that we were looking at before? Is that different, or help me understand that?
So I can speak to that. So that was a follow-up addition to the application. So it wasn't included in the staff report. However, this would need to be reviewed because this is the loading zone of the building. It might not meet code.
That's what I was concerned about. I was going to bring that up.
Okay.
So I have a question. One of the adverse potential impacts given the business use for children next door is risk to children. Am I correct in understanding that if the loading is happening in the rear and the patronage for the businesses is in front, that there isn't much, if at all, of an adverse impact by this use?
Yes, that's correct if all that loading happens. However, if there's parking in that loading zone, then that would negate that.
Sure, but that parking in the loading zone, would that be authorized for anybody's use, or would it be employee use only?
It would be authorized for anybody's use. I mean, they could paint on it, but it's for the building as a whole.
That's not something that we could restrict or specify that would be for employee use only?
Corey, can you speak to that?
Well, you raised the issue of where staff is at. We're not fully comfortable with the working parameters to identify a list of impacts and then what could be mitigated. And so I think that's a concern. Could that possibly work? Well, how we have to ask ourselves, how enforceable is that? Who's responsible for ensuring that the employees are parking there versus a customer parking there? And I would raise a little bit of hesitancy to allow a parameter that staff has to go out and enforce because it's not self-mitigated with the project. That make sense?
Yeah, thanks, Corey.
I've
One
got
more follow.
Go ahead,
go
Mason.
ahead.
Finish up your thought.
Okay, so one follow-up question. There's some, Mackenzie, would you mind pulling that map back up? There's some black hatching that's vertical from the building. And I just don't know what it is. If you could help me. It's in the red zone and it's to the right of that red zone, maybe next to, I can barely read those numbers, northeast of the 3 and the 16, and then left of the 5. Yeah, what are those?
Crosswalk.
That's a crosswalk.
That's part of the circulation connection, is part of the PDO's walk in integrating the project as a whole.
Right. Thank you.
So I'm just going to chime in again to the subject that I was referring to earlier, and then this is parking. And Corey, excuse my embarrassment in the advance for maybe going into this a bit more, but in the staff report, it says that for vehicle and equipment rental sales, it seems as though there is a specific parking requirement. So the question would be, and depending on the answer to the question, I'll have a follow-up question, but does the vehicle and equipment rental sale provision in the CUP supersede the IH zoning parking requirement? You're on mute, Corey.
The way the parking work is there's a tabulation for most of the uses that are listed in the IH zone. So if you go to the IH zone, you'll find the use list to it, and then there'll be a parking count attached to it.
Okay.
And so for vehicle equipment and say rental and sales, there's a parking count attached to that specific use.
Okay. And so the way I read that paragraph, I see a 4 per thousand requirement on a roughly 6,000 square foot space, plus 1 space for every 10 vehicles displayed, which is a 4 space minimum. So we're talking about 28 stalls just for this suite. Is that a correct interpretation?
Yes.
Okay, so if I look at the site plan and all the other uses there, it speaks to this whole issue of lack of parking.
We're running out of space.
Running out or has already run out of space?
Well, if you don't do much with the last unit, you probably have 4 or 5 stalls left, and that's it.
And has staff gone and, I mean, this gets to your enforcement issue is the problem, and we don't want to put you in a position of enforcement because that's not your job. But has the applicant provided a use of each individual suite in their building as it stands now?
They have not for every situation. What we've discussed with them in the past when we started raising this issue with the first few units that were being leased, that were not operating at the warehouse level, we addressed that with the owner and Ken Stewart, and we had him, this is where the enforcement goes in, and this is where maybe no good deed goes unpunished. We had him write a letter acknowledging that he was using up his bank of stalls and would either provide the stalls when necessary or seek a parking modification if he could qualify for one. And so we're kind of reaching that endpoint.
Yeah. Okay. That's all I've got.
Chairman Heyman, can I ask a question of the applicant?
Anyone have any concerns with inviting the applicant back?
No concerns.
No, seeing shaking heads. Go ahead, Mason.
So Lolo or Nick, if we were to approve the CUP, would you be opposed to a condition where you're not allowed any display vehicles in the parking areas?
I don't see a problem with that. I don't think that's a condition of their lease at all. So I don't think that would be a problem at all.
Okay.
They're intended
and also
to keep all of it inside.
Right. And also, would you be opposed to a condition where it prohibits unloading or loading the merchandise from a commercial transport?
Can maybe define that a little bit more?
Sure. I'm just looking at condition 5 on the proposed approval template. It says the loading and unloading of vehicles for sale from a commercial transport truck is prohibited. And then based on some areas, they'll transport a bunch of boats all in one go, and then they have to get a forklift out, and they're occupying a big part of the parking lot or unloading zone for a significant portion, which I would wonder if that is right in this location. So I'm just wondering, what's the plan for loading and unloading these boats?
Yeah, I don't have the exact information on how they do that. I know that that's more of their business operations. I'm not exactly sure what their day-to-day or intermittent delivery of vehicles or boats rather. So I'm not sure of their process on unloading and loading, but certainly, I mean, this is an IH zone, and there are loading and unloading dedicated areas. So my presumption would be that I don't know that it would be wise to necessarily restrict any, but certainly, obviously, that wouldn't be done in the public spaces, certainly where the kids are. But I think that's an aside altogether. So I think this is certainly falls into that appropriate zoning requirement as far as I can tell. It seems to me that it's more leaning to a warehousing of boats rather than the showcasing or dealership type setting of them.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Any further discussion or debate on this one?
I'll jump in on this one. I would say that we're at a spot where I think that we have to approve this. Given that it's a CUP, we shall approve if they can identify means by which they can mitigate adverse impacts. The adverse impacts as I understand them are to parking, which they've already indicated is not going to be significantly increased by the patronage here, to the potential for pedestrian interactions with unloading and loading. And I think that we can identify ways to mitigate those adverse impacts. So I'm inclined to approve, given that with certain conditions that I would propose that would include no display vehicles at all, and that unloading and unloading from large commercial trucks appear off-site, and that they transport to this site using smaller means such as just a truck with a trailer, a truck with a hitch, for example.
So are you saying no display vehicles even inside, or just no display vehicles outside?
Outside.
Okay, thanks.
So one of the things that staff has identified is that the applicant hasn't provided any information on how any adverse effects on the persons or properties in the area will be mitigated, particularly with regard to the children's recreation space next door. I understand that the applicant hasn't even raised this with the applicants next door. And I would like to know from staff, I'm trying to think through the issues of what the adverse impacts would be. It seems like most of the loading is going to be occurring in the rear of the building, although we certainly haven't restricted it to just the rear in what's been proposed. I would hope that they wouldn't try to load in the front where kids are coming and going, but we haven't placed that restriction on them. Staff, can you give me some indication as to what the adverse effects you think that might have needed to be mitigated here and why you raised that flag?
I think you've addressed those, Chair Heyman, mostly the loading and unloading of vehicles, since the boats are so large. And they have addressed that they would be loading and unloading only in the back, which does, in my opinion, mitigate the majority of that, assuming that that's what will end up happening, and that if you add the condition that no boats will be displayed in the parking lot.
Chair Heyman, I just want to make sure that the commission would have clarification. You've seen where they propose a possible amendment for parking, but would not be approved at this time because we're not amending the site to include that parking. And so you would be making the decision based on that those parking stalls are not part of the project, and it would be evaluated later. Because that would be my concern if we even entertain the idea that that's an area reserved for parking. From my understanding of this use, it's a club use, and you buy in a percentage and you have access to many boat sizes based on reservation bank. And the boat sizes can be rather small, but they can be rather large. And you have pontoon boats or any larger boats. If that becomes parking, 28 feet is not going to be a place that you can pull in a truck and back in a boat. So I just want to make sure that we're not confusing the discussion of parking shortages with the CUP. That's all.
Yeah. And so Corey, if I can restate your concern, I mean, they had put, we don't have it up right now, but they had put the new parking stalls, kind of the parallel parking type stalls there. And your concern would be how are they going to practically load and unload if people start parking along that area?
Correct. And to add those stalls in would take at least some type of administrative approval to amend their site.
Okay. Yeah, good point.
I'm also concerned that even if, let's just say that's administrative approval, it is in there and they can get a truck there, you've got right in the middle of all that unloading, you've got a pedestrian walkway. If there are kids walking there and their parents parked along there, I don't know that necessarily does fulfill the requirement to be considerate of, the surroundings and the effects of what that would do, because putting stalls right back there in that loading space, just right, to me, is a huge red flag.
So I could see if the commission put on those operation restrictions that the transport truck loading issues And also that all boats are brought to through some type of pickup and trailer method, and that you require all operations to occur indoors, then maybe the issues are mitigated. But if we start displaying outside and occupying parking, if we start adding parking where the loading spaces are, then I think we're going to have an adverse impact. That makes sense?
It does to me.
Yeah.
I have some concerns.
So then it goes back to Spencer's concern about the parking. I mean, so if they're underparked anyway, and then they're trying to add it in a spot that's not safe, so then we say we don't want that there, then it's going, okay, well, where's that going to go? Because that is a concern.
And my point really isn't necessarily are they underparked or not, because if it's a country club use, do you even need 28 stalls? From a practical perspective, no. It's not whether I agree with that or not. It's just if that's what the code says they have to do based off the use, then one of the conditions that's not stated in the staff recommendations is a parking, for lack of a better word, inventory based off of the uses that are already there. So if we're going to interpret or apply the code as it stands, regardless of how we feel about it, I'm concerned we're kind of our hands are tied a bit in that they have to provide 28 stalls for this use, regardless of if they're going to use them or not. Which personally, on a personal level, this is a side note, I don't like that. But I like more flexibility for parking, but it's a nightmare for enforcement, and so it's a double-edged sword. But to your point, Becky, you got to have 28 stalls for that one use. And so if we're going to make any recommendation, either if it gets tabled or approved, I think you have to make them do an inventory based off of the uses there and the applicable ordinance or code requirement based off of those uses to see if it even meets that.
Any further discussion or debate? If not, the chair will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion. I hereby make a motion for the Planning Commission to approve the conditional use permit request for inland marine at 1040 North, 950 West, Suite 500, subject to items 1 through 5 in the staff report and suggested reasons for action A through C.
Kevin, I think you muted yourself for a second there. Is that correct?
Did I? Well, I did for half a second, yeah. But then did I not get back in time? Suggested reasons for actions A through C.
So your motion follows the staff report exactly, right?
Yeah, because I think that the motion in the staff report covers display vehicles being kept inside the garage building area, not encumbering the parking, and then also to what Commissioner Kerr was talking about, item number 5 talks about not using commercial transport truck. And I don't know, maybe we need to be a little bit more specific about what item 5 means. We could do that. But, it's the essence of it is there.
I'm a little bit, sorry, I guess we got to procedurally figure this out. So somebody.
Yeah.
Second.
Okay, so now the motion it's moved and seconded. Now, any further discussion or debate?
Can you say who seconded that first?
It was Thomas.
Okay.
Thomas.
Thank you.
And maybe this is discussion, but this might be a question kind of. I'm looking at this feeling like the 3 and 4 kind of negate each other because the state of Utah requires display vehicle parking. to not be less than 3 spots, and then we're saying all display vehicles have to be inside. So are we, I mean, maybe Lisa can explain that. Are we going against state law by requiring that they're kept inside, or like, are they just gonna have to sit there for display vehicle, like non-use parking stalls? What's
Empty parking stalls.
I'm not familiar with the requirement to have display vehicles available, so I don't know, maybe Corey can respond to that. I don't know what state law you're talking about.
Dealer license, business license requires a minimum of 3 display areas. In the past, now I don't know the law specifically myself, but in the past, a couple of operators that do on their online sales do their display inside their warehouse. Whether that meets muster of state law, I don't know, but that's what they have represented in the past in the I-8 zone when they've been approved for car sales.
But I'm saying our requirement to have it inside, that's what I'm asking for. Is our
Right.
requirement against?
If they have the display area of 3 stalls inside the warehouse, and that in the past, other applicants met the state requirement.
Yeah, so that's what we're stating, is that they need to be inside.
But
They're
there
not-
will be 3 stalls inside. That's what we're saying.
Correct.
Yeah, there's gonna be multiple boats inside, yes.
Okay.
No, there is nothing in the staff report that requires that all loading and unloading take place in the rear. I mean, we assume that that's where it's going to happen, but I would point out that that's not in the motion. So if we approve it the way that it's drafted, I think that they would be allowed to load and unload right in front of the building with
Right.
coconut.
Overhead doors are in the back, not in the front, right? So how's that going to happen in the front? Just it can't.
Well, unless they have multiple people trying to pick up boats on the same evening for the same weekend, and there's no way for them to do that but to drag boats out to the front so that people can pick up, you know, a boat out front.
Well, do we know if there's a warehouse door that will open from the front?
I'm less concerned about the warehouse door being open from the front and then having multiple people that all need to pick up their trailers at 5 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. And so they park a couple of the boats out front so people can just get in and park and take them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm also still concerned that we're not following code with parking, whether or not we agree with it. I just am concerned about that. And I'm concerned that we've got these parking stalls in a loading zone. I just think that's a horrible idea.
Well, that's a separate issue though, isn't it? Putting those parking stalls in the loading zone.
Right, those parking stalls don't bear or hold sway with this particular application.
It would require a site plan amendment.
I would like to make a motion to amend the current motion on the table to add a 6th requirement that the loading and unloading occur only in the rear of the building, that it be clearly signed and striped as appropriate, subject to staff's oversight to, you know, their discretion to determine what the limits of that would be. But that there be some signage for all boat users as they come on to the property to tell them where to go with their trailers to load and or unload, and that it happen only in the rear of the building.
Second.
Who seconded that? You, Kevin. Great. Okay, so let's go ahead. And is there any further comment or discussion on the motion to amend, which is adding that 6th condition? If not, let's go ahead and take a vote on that. We'll start with Commissioner Daly,
Aye.
Commissioner Summerhays,
Abstain.
This
Can I
is
do
just
that?
the amendment. This is
Yeah.
that's just the amendment.
Oh, just the amendment? Yeah, sure. Yay. A.
Commissioner Wilcox,
Yay.
yes?
Aye. Yes.
Great.
Aye.
Commissioner Kerr,
Aye.
Commissioner Wright,
Aye.
Commissioner Hunt,
Aye.
and myself is also aye. Okay, so now we have on the table a motion to approve the conditional use permit with reasons 1 through 5, plus the 6th condition that we've just added through Mason's motion. Now, any further discussion on this one?
Here's my last little piece of the discussion. I feel like this applicant is going to come and see us again. Obviously, we've tabled this, his first thing. So we're not unduly like hurting him to come back because he's coming back anyway. There are some things that just don't sit right with me as far as following the code that's required and really with parking stalls and also affecting neighboring surroundings. I really don't feel comfortable. Whenever it's kids involved, I get a little bit more hypersensitive to kids running out to cars and different things like that. And so when it's a big truck, I mean, if it's like they're kids and they were doing something that's just more, they didn't have enough parking stalls, that's one thing. But if there's kids and like giant boats that you can't see around and you're always, that just doesn't feel right to me. So I personally think that it still there's no way to mitigate, they haven't mitigated that concern and they haven't followed the code for the parking requirements. So I am opposed to approval.
My follow-up to Becky's point is the conditional use permit request is for vehicle leasing and sales. And as part and parcel of that request, they're essentially asking to be subject to 28 stalls. So we're doing something kind of strange by this action by saying, we'll give you a conditional use approval, but within that conditional use approval, we're going to change the conditional use of that. It's just kind of a little discombobulated. That's my problem with it.
But aren't we saying though that there is parking there, there is sufficient parking there now, today, and so when they start doing this, that's fine, but we're in the future, when you fill that last tenant space, there's not going to be parking there for that one. So we're stealing from the future to do it today.
I don't know if we know to that, Kevin, just because the applicant hasn't provided staff, which can't provide to us, an inventory of their existing uses and their parking requirements. So I don't know if we can answer that question thoroughly.
That's fair. Back to Becky's point though about mitigating the impact to the kids next door. I think that in my mind that is mitigated if you keep all that loading and unloading on the back of the building. It looks like there is flow. You could come in and flow through all the way on the back. And the kids are probably not on the back. I don't know for sure, but they're going to be around on the front. And so, you know, I think that there's enough separation in my mind to keep those, to keep it separated, and you're not going to impact the neighbors.
Lisa, can I ask you a question? Not to beat a dead horse, but if the conditional use approval is for this vehicular leasing and sales, which requires that 28 stalls, how do we formulate the proposals so that they aren't subject to the 28 stalls? Because we are requiring them to take 28 stalls. And maybe to Kevin's point, we'll deal with that later. Lisa, you frozen?
Lisa's frozen.
Oh.
And the
okay.
PDO by approval. Wait, can you hear me?
Yes.
You could type it in the chat and we can read it if you want us to.
That's kind of long. Anyway.
Not getting anything.
No.
Nada.
Maybe if everybody mutes while she talks, it might help.
And it might be that your microphone threshold is too low. If you need to sit closer, perhaps.
Yeah. I think I'm close enough.
Can't hear anything, Lisa. Sorry.
Anything?
You come in and out. I'll hear you say something very clearly for a half a second, then you're gone.
All right, I'm gonna chat.
Of course, that came through loud and clear.
The video works great.
So she's saying it's different because it's a PDO, and so we can have, okay. So we have flexibility. Okay, perfect. That answers my concern, so I'm happy.
Okay.
So just a question for Leah on when Lisa types into the chat, does everybody see that on YouTube? Is the public seeing the chat?
No, which somebody's going to need to read it out loud.
Okay, then I'm going to read that out loud just so we can make sure that we're getting it in. So Lisa responded and said, this is different because it is in a PDO. PDO can alter the parking requirements for the project.
So do we need to add that notation as part of the action item that Kevin proposed?
I would add it in, but we understand your expectation of parking, because if you alter the requirements for this use, that in essence allows other stalls to be used somewhere else. And so it'd be important to know your expectation.
Yeah, so are we saying that the 28 stalls, how many stalls are we really imposing on this user? That's my question, because we need to let this user know for their future tenants, how many stalls are we telling them they have to have dedicated for their use? And I don't think we've answered that question.
We haven't. I don't know if McKinsey has that information, but I don't think so.
No, we don't have that information.
Does that make sense? My thought process there for the commission?
I think so. So right now we do have a motion on the table to approve the conditional permit, use permit for reasons 1 through 5 plus the 6th that was added through the motion. Lisa typed
Lisa's part to the findings, right? Like to D? Or do we need to do that?
Well, let me pause for just a second. So Lisa is sharing. She says, what have we done for prior approvals in the PDO? Do we address parking requirements? Have we addressed parking numbers for prior approvals?
For other PDOs, yes, we've assigned parking. So an example is the Megaplex Theater. We changed the office from 5 per thousand to 4 per thousand. In this PDO, it didn't address the parking outside of the estimated uses that they put in the PDO, but it opened up to use the other uses too. So there was no parking count other than they initially represented, and most of it was office, flex, warehouse. So I think the issue is if they're doing more of this timeshare or country club, I don't know how many parking they need. So that would be some information we need to know, because that potentially frees up parking for the last remaining unit.
Yeah, so that'd be a question to Kevin to say, okay, to amend your approval subject to, is it 10 stalls? Is it 5? Is it 15? Is it 20? How many stalls are we going to require them to have?
I'm open to an amendment, and I don't think I don't have a number. So, you know, if you have a number or somebody else has a number, then let's do that. So
Chair Heyman, Lisa's weighing in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so Lisa has weighed in to say in this specific project for individual uses, if we didn't specifically alter parking requirements with the PDO, then the parking may be an issue.
Yeah, and I've been operating under the assumption that the parking has already been sort of addressed. And given that we now have questions, I'm more concerned.
So then maybe, do we need to vote on this motion and potentially make a motion to table and come back to this? I'd support that.
Yeah, right now we do have a motion on the table So I think that we need to address that motion first.
So
before
I would just say then, you know, what I plan on doing is voting against this motion. Which sounds funny, I know, but I'm going to vote against my own motion to be able to replace it with a new motion to table so that we can come back and get some of these answers that we need.
Well, here's a question procedurally. Can't the proponent of the motion withdraw his motion?
Yes.
Thank you, Mason.
Okay.
Lisa, will you nod or shake your head if we think that we can withdraw a motion? Oh, she's typing. Not necessarily once it has been seconded.
Nay,
Yeah.
nay.
Nay, I defer to Lisa on that. So if there's, I don't want to cut off discussion prematurely, but if we're ready to vote on this one that's based on the table, I'm with Kevin. I'll just signal to you I was going to vote nay anyway. So are we okay to start?
Yeah, I'm a nay, so let's just
Okay,
get
let's take a roll call vote. Are you ready? We'll start with Commissioner Hunt.
Nay.
Commissioner Wright.
Nay.
Commissioner Kerr.
Nay.
Commissioner Wilcox.
Nay.
Commissioner Summerhays.
Nay.
Commissioner Daly.
Nay.
And I'm also a nay. Okay. Kevin, since this was your motion, you want to move to table it?
Sure. I hereby make a motion for the Planning Commission to table the conditional use permit request for inland marine at approximately 1040 North, 950 West, Suite 500, and direct the applicant to provide or address the following. Let me see. Let's just make sure these make sense, though. Provide for parking needs, comparison of parking. Yep. These will be good because this will help us to answer some of that stuff, and it's not bad to have this information. So let's go items 1 through 6 as outlined in the staff report.
Second.
Okay, great. It's been moved and seconded. Yeah, and I really specifically for myself, I want to know what the uses are at that children's recreation space next door. Are kids coming in and out the back? How likely do we think it is that parents are going to park in the back?
Sure.
Okay, moved and seconded. Let's go ahead and do.
Oh, now Shaylin's stalling it.
What? Am I frozen?
No,
You
you're
were
good.
frozen for a second.
Oh, phew. For a second, I had an unstable internet connection
Yeah,
notice.
I did too.
Okay, I blame that on Utopia. It's usually really good, but
No
apparently
way. Utopia is great.
it has issues from time to time.
I have
Okay.
had issues. Utopia rocks.
Oh, can I ask a question about the motion?
Yes.
Yes.
I guess it would be in 3, provide safeguards to mitigate detrimental impacts mentioned. I just want to clarify for our understanding and for the applicant, does that fairly include a requirement that they come in with a plan on where loading and unloading is going to happen and whether signage or striping needs to occur?
So number 2 has information on loading and unloading of vehicles.
Right, but I'm thinking like what additional, I just want to make sure that when they come back, they bring to us some kind of plan and have identified how it mitigates the adverse impacts. So I'm hoping that they can come back with something that would include signage or striping with specific areas. And maybe it's just 2 and 3 together is what I want to make sure that we're clear.
Mason, I really liked your signage idea a lot. I thought that was an excellent suggestion. And I would assume that that's included in number 3.
Right.
Okay, so the motion on the motion on the table is to table. So if there's no further discussion, I'm just going to start randomly doing this for fun now. Commissioner Summerhays.
Aye.
Commissioner Wright.
Aye.
Commissioner Kerr.
Aye.
Commissioner Wilcox.
Aye.
Commissioner Hunt.
Aye.
Commissioner Daly.
Aye.
And then I'm also an aye. Okay, that one was a spirited debate. I would encourage the applicant, if they have any questions, talk to staff. Staff is really good at helping work through issues like these. Okay, so Leah had sent me a notice that the mayor wanted to address us briefly. And Leah, do we have the mayor on the phone?
Yes.
Great. Mayor, are you there?
I'm here.
Fantastic. I will turn the time over to you.
Okay. Yeah, y'all hear me okay? There's a little delay. I just want to, I'll be quick because I appreciate everything you've been doing tonight. It's good to see somebody else on the screen besides health officials and other mayors and city managers and the lieutenant governor. It's nice to see some people from our city on the screen. And I've been impressed how well you've done tonight. It's almost been as exciting as if we've been at a jazz game tonight, but you know, not almost we're there. So, but thanks. I think we're all spending our time in strange ways. I'm spending my time trying to take care of the residents health-wise and businesses from failing with all these Paycheck Protection Program loans that are out there, and I'm sure you're all on a lot of the same. And I was talking to Congressman Stewart's office today, and they wanted me to give the best wishes to all our city leaders and officials. And so I was in the middle of doing another one of these loans, and I thought I'll just watch the Planning Commission tonight too. So good job, and thanks so much for what you're doing, and I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Mayor. Stay safe. We appreciate what you're doing for our city as well.
So you stay all healthy, okay?
I think trying really hard. Thanks so much, Mayor.
All right, see you guys.
Thanks. You know, it's been a learning process, but I feel like we've made it through. I think that we did, I'm going to pat ourselves on the back. I think that we did all right with this whole new format. It's working. It's always fun to see what people put up behind them. So, okay, moving along to item number 5, which is our Community Development Director's report. So I will turn the time over to you, Corey. Ooh, that's a lovely background. Oh, Corey, you're muted.
Tulum, Mexico. You can enjoy Tulum, Mexico while you're getting back. Just a couple of items to go over with you and then maybe get some feedback from you as a commission. Tentatively, I'm not sure this project, the Hive development that's listed, I'm not sure it's on your next agenda. They're still trying to put some plans together. The address originally was 955 North. That was wrong. It's 550 North, 400 West. And that is the trailer park site. So you may have heard rumors going around the community. I know I've received a number of calls in the last few days. The trailer park has been purchased by a developer, and they do plan on submitting a redevelopment of that project for multifamily. And you'll be seeing that in the near future. Just by way of information for you, they don't see constructing this year on that project that I know of to date. So they'll go through the entitlement process, but they'll be giving time for residents to make arrangements for their living. So if you hear rumors, you now know that.
Do you know, is it an Ivory Home development? Do you know? I've heard rumors, I just don't know.
It's actually CW Land. So CW Land has, Commissioner Kerr is probably familiar with the project at the Swan Lakes Golf Course. So, so they will be pursuing that. I'm not sure it'll be on your next agenda, but that brings up a discussion item to have with you. Also, the Williamsburg Place Lot 9, it's in its existing subdivision. It's a large lot, and they'd like to split that out, and I think that will be ready for your next meeting. As to the issues of public comment, certainly tonight when we planned for the phone call, we anticipated there probably was not a lot of call-in. If we have a project like the Hive development come in, I assume that there'll be much larger participations to a project because it can be seen as controversial. One of the matters that we're considering and needs your feedback on is when we post this property for an actual meeting, we're anticipating in our minds to put on that we'll accept public comment until 5 o'clock that meeting time. And then when we get written comment, and then we would compile the written comment and post it on for your meeting. And then if we need to do additional written time, we could do more additional time if your thing's coming up. But I think the concern that on a staff level is it's going to be difficult to mitigate 20 or 30 people calling in on Zoom and trying to manage that. Or if there's a 20-second delay for the call-ins, how long do you wait for each call to come in, and how do we stage them in a waiting room, if you will, to comment? So I see public comment could be controversial with one that would be a much larger participation debate. So I'm looking for your thoughts on that.
Well, I can already tell you that there's going to be a lot of people calling in on that. This is my backyard, and it blew up today in our neighborhood, and people didn't care about COVID-19. They were within 6 feet of each other talking about this project, and whenever it does come up on our agenda, I can guarantee there's going to be a lot of people out for it. So it's a good thing to bring up of how we're going to handle that, especially with the way meetings are right now. And
yeah.
So I don't know how we're going to address that.
Corey, I like the thinking. Well, let me rephrase this. I understand the thinking behind requiring the submission only of written comments from a manageability standpoint. I also am concerned, though, about not allowing people the opportunity to hear and react to other public comments as they're coming in. I mean, sometimes somebody will hear somebody say something and they'll say, oh, I have a related concern. And I think that that's really an important process. It occurs to me that maybe this is dumb, but radio talk show hosts do this all the time. They have somebody managing the calls, and they get callers in the queue, and the person will say, okay, up next is so-and-so from this location. Could we think about doing something like that, where we have people calling into a number and putting them in a queue, and then being told, okay, next person in line is so-and-so, and then we allow that person to speak? But I'm just throwing it out there.
I'd have to defer to Leah to know what our system, if she by chance knows what's the system's capacity to do something like that. I agree with you that people want a chance to respond. So the other thing that I'm having conversations with the developed community about as a whole is that a project that might have a lot of meeting, there probably is not a one and done meeting. There's probably an introductory and allow a comment to come in that way. Then people can hear the things on YouTube. And then we'd probably extend that again for some written comments. So part of my discussion on the development community side is this may not be as efficient as you want. So there may be a couple of tablings to come away. Do you want to pursue the project immediately, or do you want to hold back until maybe some social distancing protocols change? And I don't know, but I just wanted your feedback. And Leah, I don't know if we can stage call-ins.
I'd have to check and see what our phone system can handle. We did have some items on council that we had to do the write-in comments, and it seemed to work pretty well. People responded really well to it. So I think at this point we may just have to kind of see what we can do and what works and do the best we can.
Can we do a hybrid approach? I like both. I mean, the concern is, for example, Thomas is talking about the people in his neighborhood. They want a chance to speak, to Shaylin's point, but we also want to help an applicant. That's our duty, is to service both entities. Maybe we do a multiple written comment period so that at least the ball gets rolling for a developer's sake. But maybe we qualify that and say, hey, we're going to, under these extreme circumstances, this is going to be a little different process and it may not move as quickly as you can. So either do you want to wait until this all settles out and we can meet live in person, or do you want us to take multiple rounds of public comment and still, as part of that, wait until things settle out so that at least we can have an in-person meeting? I don't know what they're going to want to do, but maybe there's a two-prong approach, and Lisa may be able to provide us some guidance in terms of allowing proper public comment. But maybe that at least gets a developer a head start, but they know in the back of their mind they're going to have to allow the public to speak live and in person at some point before any approvals get pushed forward or disapprovals.
And I think that's good feedback, because the city manager and I talked about that, and I have not yet had thorough conversations with their team. And also, if anybody else comes along, do they anticipate a large meeting on sharing that same information? But I really wanted your feedback of the commission. If you feel that such items would, if they generate a perceived amount of public input, maybe the direction is, the preferred scenario is either to get the ball rolling, knowing that we'll wait for a time for in-person meeting, or maybe they want to wait till we can conduct in-person meetings.
Yeah, and Corey, I'm just going to weigh in here because Lisa has just sent a chat through to everyone saying the statute requires the public to be able to, quote, participate, end quote. I do have some concerns with only written comment without live participation.
And could I jump in here a little bit as well? The way Layton's Planning Commission has decided to balance those two exact concerns that Lisa identified is that they're taking live emails that will be read into the record as the Planning Commission goes, and that the participants can email at any time prior to the hearing being closed. We decided to not allow call-ins, and that was participation enough.
Yeah, and I think Lisa's trying to balance that same thing you're talking about. She's writing in here, the intent of the Open Meeting Act's amendments was to be able to conduct the meetings and not delay applications. So yeah, electronic participation through live emails is maybe something that, Leah, we can talk about and how to do that.
But I will hasten to add, my experience with Zoom is that when someone calls in to one of Zoom's numbers, usually the closest one is the San Jose number that comes as part of the participation, the host can identify who they are and then rename them and then control their muting. So this would be a lot on you. You'd be air traffic controller, Leah, but you could say, have to call in by 6:30, you have to identify yourself, and then I'm going to rename you, and then you will unmute them as things goes by. I don't know if that's something you want to do, but it is one solution we did consider.
Right. I think if it's going, it could potentially be a large issue. We may want to try and do both, allow people who want to comment but may not want to call in to have that time to send in emails, and then possibly still allow people to call in the day of. We're just gonna have to see what the response is and how, take it as we go.
Well, and we may want to check and just see, I mean, call up some other cities and like Layton, right? Call and see what other cities have, maybe other cities have come up with some alternate ideas.
There's been a lot of chatter about it, and I think everybody's just trying to figure out how to do it and what the best way is. A lot of cities are just not dealing with things right now. They're kind of pushing them out, but at the same time, we don't want to do that, hold up applications. So we just need to discuss it and figure out the best way to handle it.
So my takeaway from the question is open it up for people to be able to provide the written comment, but let's figure out a way for live comment too. And maybe some of the written comment will, not everybody likes to be the center of attention like planners.
Like who?
I hope to get you to laugh a little bit.
Like who did you say?
Planners.
Yes.
That's good feedback, and we'll just coordinate with Leah and the city's capability, and Shaylin will also report back to you what we find so that you're aware of it up front.
Whatever we do, I just think if we're just really, really, obviously you're going to be very transparent with the public so that they completely understand what is required on how to participate and how the different steps would be or whatever, just ensuring that we've really adequately communicated that to them.
And I think there comes a certain point where if you feel like there's maybe some shortfalls, then we don't time out the project, but we pause it and try to fix those shortfalls and address them quickly and then move forward. So I feel comfortable we can try something out. But I just wanted you to be aware, I think that will generate the controversy. I just got a text from the mayor indicating that he's received several calls, so he's anticipating a lot of people wanting to weigh in on that project when it comes. City Council, they've been pretty lean on their meetings for planning issues. And I think for most of the issues, they've been addressing Lisa's burden of our infectious disease response plan that's been capturing most of her attention and work also. So nothing to report from the council. And I did put your 2020 commission goals, and there's no changes to date. I think the Main Street plan right now is in hiatus till we can come back together. I don't know what your thoughts are.
No, that was what I was thinking. In fact, at our last planning commission meeting, I was commending the number of people who had shown up to give comments to us. And now I'm feeling incredibly badly that we had a room full of people. I view crowds differently now. I'm still delighted that so many people participated, but I think that that's right. I think that we want to put that one kind of on the back burner for a minute. And understandably, City Council is focused on health issues and not planning issues right now. I will say that Lisa had texted and said that staff is happy to look into solving this issue, meaning the live, how to work out the live commentary. Thank you very much, staff. I just want to commend you guys. I think you've all done, you, Mackenzie, Lisa, Leah, you guys have all done a great job of putting this together under really trying circumstances and continuing to move the city's business along. So we appreciate all of you. The last item on our agenda is always the funnest part, which is reviewing our last planning commission meeting minutes for March 11th. So we'll do this in the ordinary course. I'm going through page by page. If you have any changes or comments, let me know. We'll start with page 1. Page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7.
Lisa's weighed in on a comment.
Oh, Lisa says, well, she says, I will work on my internet connection for next time. And near the end, it addresses the subdivision issue twice. I think we need to take one of the paragraphs out. Which page, Lisa? Sorry. At the bottom of page 6. She says, I don't have it in front of me.
No, I think it's on page 9. She's
Is
talking about page 9.
Is she ahead of where I am?
She is. She's anticipating you.
Sorry, I was thinking.
So on page 9, starting with line 25, you got the discussion of subdivision ordinance, and then on 32, discussion of control.
Oh, yeah, I see what she's saying. I think
So-
that's what she's going to be. Well, no.
Yeah,
One
it's the
says
same.
that she summarized the ordinance updates for chapter 19, and then she proposed revisions to chapter 15. I didn't go back and look.
She just messaged in again near the end. It addresses the subdivision twice. I think we need to take out one of the paragraphs. I don't have it in front of me. Hold, please. So we're holding.
I'm
Holding.
holding. Well, until we get back from Lisa, did I say page 8? Any comments on page 8? Oh, she says, yes, take the second reference to the subdivision ordinance out. So
On page 9.
on page 9, we're taking out lines 32 through 36 on page 9. Lisa, is that correct? I feel like I should get the Jeopardy music. Yes, okay. So, and any changes on page 10? So I will move that we approve the minutes as amended.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded by Commissioner Summerhays. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? I guess, do we have to actually do a roll call vote on this one? Probably not. No, everybody said aye. It was by unanimous consent.
Lisa says no. And just a shout out to Leah. She's the one that helped me and McKinsey come on board with getting this meeting going. So I just want to make sure she gets a lot of the credit.
Yeah, this was, you guys, again, I think that you guys did a tremendous job. It's been an interesting process and challenging for everybody, I'm sure. So thank you guys all for participating from your respective residences. I appreciate the fun backgrounds that added some spice to some things. Yes, and everybody stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll just meet up 2 weeks from now via the same Zoom chat, I suppose.
You guys are great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Take care.
Motion to adjourn.
I move that, yes, I was just thinking, I know I'm forgetting something. I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye. I have a
Any opposed?
question. I have a question.
Question.
How do we get different backgrounds? I want to turn mine into a discotheque.